Chapter 601. 12 corpses were lying in a row on the drill ground of Ningbo City. They were clean, without a trace of blood, and each had a very thin wound on the left and right temple, as well as the heart. It was these 3 wounds that took the lives of these soldiers. All the soldiers who were training in the drill ground had rushed to the city wall, and the defensive mechanism of Ningbo City had been fully activated. A layer of grayish-white mist pervaded the wilderness about 100 miles away from the city wall. Vaguely, some strange figures could be seen moving amidst the mist. They looked like humans, but if one took a closer look, one would find that they were actually twisting humanoid shadows. This mist was the first layer of the defensive mechanism of Ningbo City, the weeping of 100 ghosts of the Yellow Spring. There were only about 100 soldiers led by Huang Liang on the drill ground. When Wu Qi arrived with a few armored soldiers, Huang Liang was lying on top of a corpse like a hound, his nose twitching rapidly and making a clear, audible gasp. His fingers were swiftly stroking the corpse inch by inch. Judging by his rapt attention, those who did not know him would think that Huang Liang was a pervert who liked corpses. Wu Qi strode up to Huang Liang and asked in a low voice, "What did you find?" Huang Liang raised his head. His usual wretchedness and slipperiness had vanished without a trace, replaced by a surprising seriousness and solemnity. "All of them were killed in an instant, almost without being able to fight back," he said in a deep voice. "There is no smell of blood on their weapons, which shows that they did not hurt the enemy. All the blood in their bodies has been drained and filled with a strange potion." The sound of footsteps rang out as Yumu, who had received the news, hurried over with a large group of officials from High Province. Yumu happened to hear Huang Liang's autopsy report, and he snapped, "All the scouting teams are led by at least one general of the first star realm of the first Panga heaven. How could they be killed before they could even send back a signal? Is everyone's injury the same?" When Huang Liang was about to say something, a sharp and unpleasant ringing of a copper bell suddenly came from the distant mountains. The ringing of the copper bell was like an awl piercing into everyone's eardrums. Except for Wu Qi, who was far more powerful than everyone else, the others could not help but cover their ears and squat down in discomfort. The ear-piercing sound of the bell rang out continuously. The 12 corpses lying on the ground suddenly moved and bounced up from the ground. Their claws were bent like hooks, and they ruthlessly tore at the living people around them. Apart from the fact that the 12 corpses had their blood drained and their skin turned as white as snow, everything else seemed normal. But as soon as the bell rang, the 12 corpses suddenly shriveled up. Their skin tightly wrapped around their dried muscles, and the lines of muscles could be clearly seen under the skin. Their originally snow-white skin had turned into a wretched green, and their suddenly opened eyes had also turned into a frightening crimson color. Their claws had also turned into iron hooks, and their pitch-black claws carried a pungent stench. It was obvious that they had been poisoned. "How dare you!" Wu Qi snorted coldly and stamped his foot. The ground of the drill ground, which was paved with boulders, rippled like water, and a shockwave spread out in all directions. The others only felt their feet go soft, and then nothing else. However, the 12 zombies who had suddenly sprung up were swept by the shockwave, and the bones below their waists made a series of cracking noises, while the bones in their legs were completely shattered. With their legs broken, the 12 zombies fell to the ground at the same time, waving their arms wildly and letting out roars from their mouths. "Someone is using the art of refining zombies right in front of us." Wu Qi laughed in a deep voice. Suddenly, a large cloud of grayish-white mist gushed out from his palms. Accompanied by shrill ghost howls, the mist was set ablaze, and a green ghost fire wrapped around Wu Qi's palms. The flesh on his palms had turned into a strange green and transparent state, but the bones underneath were clearly visible, emitting an evil black light. "Yo, the nether ghost soul captivating palm has already reached the level of Mahayana? Tan Lang, we did not choose the wrong person. Cultivating both body and magic is indeed a wonderful thing." Large sheets of gray mist and green flame burst out from Wu Qi's palms. As he was about to strike the 12 zombies, a deep, hoarse, and unpleasant voice suddenly rang out. Yu Huai, who was clad in a long black robe and wrapped in a black cloth from head to toe, strode over with a few men who were also clad in black cloaks. While walking, he kept praising Wu Qi, saying that a talent who cultivated both body and magic was really rare. Wu Qi smiled faintly, shook his head, and said, "Your Excellency Yu Huai, you flatter me. How could the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance use such a petty trick? Tan Lang just wants to teach them a lesson." Yu Huai laughed coldly and said, "Of course, a lesson must be taught. However, the Nether Ghost's soul captivating palm is more effective when used on a living person, but it is still a little lacking when used to scheme against someone from afar. Hehe, since it is an art of corpse control, I think it's better to let Lao Tzu teach them a lesson." With a shake of his hand, Wu Qi retracted the Nether Ghost's soul captivating palm and looked curiously at Yu Huai. In the mansion of Yu Clan, Yu Huai had been hiding in his own great hall and refining 108 fiend corpses. It was a forbidden art of Yu Clan, which showed that Yu Huai was very proficient in spells related to zombies. As he said, the Nether Ghost's soul captivating palm Wu Qi had learned in recent days could cause severe damage to a living person, but when used to curse someone, its power was very ordinary. Yu Huai would be the one to show his trick, and let Wu Qi see what kind of powerful trick he had to scheme against someone. The ringing of the bell in the distance grew more and more urgent, as if the person who rang the bell was very impatient to get these zombies to attack someone. But, as the legs of these zombies were all broken, they could not stand up at all. They could only roll and crawl on the ground, and did not have the strength to hurt someone. Yu Huai came in front of the 12 zombies and let out a few strange laughs. Suddenly, a large plume of dense black mist gushed out of his black cloak. Like a living creature, the black mist quickly enveloped the 12 zombies and crawled into their 7 orifices. The 12 zombies stiffened abruptly, and their bodies gradually floated up into the air, quickly leaning against each other in midair. In Wu Qi's astonished gaze, these zombies fused with each other like water droplets, gradually forming a pitch-black body that was as tall as an ordinary man. Pulling out a pitch-black bone knife, Yu Huai came in front of the floating body and recited a few incantations in a low voice. He stabbed the knife hard into the center of the zombie's brows, then pierced the zombie's heart, lower abdomen, ribs, and other vital parts with the bone knife. After stabbing the zombie 18 times in total, Yu Huai smiled sinisterly and casually slapped the top of the zombie's head with his palm. With a swoosh, the zombie disappeared without a trace. Almost at the same time, a tragic scream was suddenly heard coming from the mountains in the distance. Dozens of sword beams shot into the sky from the mountains, charging menacingly in the direction of Ningbo City. The scream had been coming from the mountains, rising high into the clouds and going on endlessly. Yu Huai laughed strangely and said, "A healthy immortal suddenly has the flesh and blood of 12 zombies in his body, and hidden in them are the eggs of the nether butterfly, which can only be found in the yellow spring. When the larvae hatch, they feed on his flesh and blood, and it will take them 3 days and 3 nights to devour him along with his soul." Hehe, how dare you show off such a petty trick in front of Lao Tzu? Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath. He imagined that an immortal suddenly had the flesh and blood of 12 zombies inside his body, and countless eggs were hatching, feeding on the flesh and blood to break out of their shells. It was a cruel torture. A chill ran up and down his spine, and he became even more fearful of the various terrible mystic arts of the Directorate of Celestials. Since Yu Huai had such a trick, Yu Mu might have even fiercer curses. He had to be extra careful, or he would not even know when he would suffer a great loss. Dozens of sword beams flew out of Ningbo City, and then came a sharp female voice that sounded like steel needles. "This is outrageous. How could you plot against fellow Taoist Lao Yin with that evil fiend technique? Poor fellow Taoist Lao Yin, he died so miserably. All of you are guilty, and you will be punished by the heaven." Wu Qi grinned, then cupped his fist and bowed to Yu Huai. "Your Excellency Yu Huai is indeed an unpredictable prodigy. Now that those scumbags from Myriad Immortal Alliance have come to our door, I'll bring my men and give them a head-on blow." Yu Huai waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "Go, just go. They are just a group of heaven immortals. Tan Lang, you can totally defeat them all by yourself, and you don't even need the honorable elders to do anything. Take your time and play with them. Let's see how much Myriad Immortal Alliance can spend for the sake of High Province. While Yu Huai was talking to Wu Qi, on a mountain 900 miles away from Ningbo City, a black stone chair was placed upright on the top of the mountain. A man clad in a black linen robe and wearing a black jade crown on his head, his face expressionless and his body emanating a deathly aura like that of a zombie, was sitting steadily on the stone chair. He looked in the direction of Ningbo City without saying a word, and behind him stood 36 generals clad in heavy black armors, who were standing in a row. From a distance, he saw Wu Qi leading his men to the top of the city wall and arguing with those heaven immortals hovering in midair, cultivating both fleshly body and magic. I can't believe Yu Mu has found such a good seedling. Is his name Tan Lang? Pay more attention to him, and if possible, promote him. The Yu clan in Liangzhu is already under my control, and this Tan Lang is now one of us. A general behind him answered in a low, muffled voice, then asked in a deep voice, Your Excellency, the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance was severely wounded by Lao Wang, and he is now searching for spirit herbs to save his life. 13 of the 18 elders of Divine Hall were seriously wounded by Lao Wang's scheme, so they should be hiding and recuperating now. Why are they fanning the flames and stirring up trouble? The man frowned. After pondering for a long time, he slowly raised his right hand and said softly, They must have a goal. Apart from High Province, Myriad Immortal Alliance is stirring up disputes in over 200 ninth-grade provinces at the same time. No matter what they want to do, we just need to kill them all with the strongest force. Pass down my order, all the soldiers must not slack off. The 36 generals behind him responded in unison. Just when the black-clothed man was about to give some orders, a wild gust of wind suddenly rose from the ground. A fierce-looking man, who was dressed in a black tight suit and only had his eyes exposed, rushed out of the gust and respectfully knelt down before the black-clothed man. Your Excellency, the new celestial ambassador sent by the celestial court to the Yu's imperial city has arrived. The man looked up and asked curiously, Which celestial lord is it? Or, is it an immortal king who has come to the mortal realm? It is, the immortal king conferred by the celestial court, King of Han, Lu Bang. The burly man answered in a deep voice. The man clenched his fists and crushed the armrests of the stone chair. Lu Bang! He cried out through clenched teeth. The burly man did not dare to look up and said urgently, And the 3 heroes around Lu Bang are Zhang Liang, Han Xian, and Xiao He, 3 celestial lords, who are his deputies. The man smiled grimly, then suddenly turned into a plume of black smoke and flew up into the sky, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Chapter 602. Ningbo City. On the city wall, Wu Qi had also donned a set of armor made of leather. The inside of the pale green armor was lined with a leather armor as thick as a finger, and the outside was covered with a layer of shell that was half a finger thick. It was unknown what kind of large beetle it came from. The armor wrapped tightly around Wu Qi's body, but it did not hinder his movement at all. On the contrary, when he walked, there was a breeze following him, which could greatly enhance Wu Qi's fighting strength. The armor was also a fine product purchased by Yu Mu through private channels. Although it did not have any decorative patterns and looked very inconspicuous, it was actually crafted by a master craftsman in Liangzhu. It had an amazing defensive strength that could withstand a full-force blow from an upper-tier heaven immortal wielding an immortal item. Before the immortal stones embedded in the armor ran out of immortal energy, no heaven immortal below the 12th tier could cause any harm to Wu Qi. Holding a dragon-hunting crossbow in his hand, Wu Qi cocked a bone arrow engraved with powerful corrosive runes onto the bowstring and looked at the heaven immortals hovering about 1 mile above him with a smile. Just now, he and the group of heaven immortals sent out by Myriad Immortal Alliance had been quarreling for a full hour, leaving dozens of heaven immortals speechless, and their faces livid with rage because of Wu Qi's rich imagination and almost unimaginable words. All kinds of vicious, mocking, insidious, and obscene curses from the internet on Earth had greatly broadened the horizons of the generals and soldiers around Wu Qi. If not for the fact that the dozens of heaven immortals in midair had not attained the body of a heaven immortal and had no cardiovascular disease, 2 or 3 of them would have been cursed to death by Wu Qi. A pretty female immortal, who was dressed in a palace dress and had 2 large peonies on her head like a matchmaker, was so angry that her eyes darted from side to side. She pointed at Wu Qi and snapped, "I don't want to talk nonsense with you, you little man. You have a sharp tongue, and I'm ashamed of my inferiority. If you are a real man, come out and fight me." Wu Qi smiled, then waved at the female immortal and said, "Let's go out and have a showdown. Woman, do you think I'm stupid? So many of you are waiting outside the city like fiends. Do you want me to go out and let you attack me?" The female immortal paused. She glanced at her companion and frowned. "Fairy, I guarantee that if you dare to come out, no one will attack you." Wu Qi sighed softly. He crooked his finger at the female immortal and laughed out loud. "Then, Fairy, please enter the city and fight me on the drill ground. I swear on my character that I will never let my subordinates attack you." The female immortal's expression changed slightly. How would she have the guts to enter the city and fight it out with Wu Qi? Not only the female immortal, even the other immortals had an unsightly expression on their faces as they glanced at Ningbo City, whose defensive strength was worlds apart from before. Especially the numerous archers and crossbowmen on the city wall, as well as the 200 huge fire soul catapults. Such a defensive strength was not something that dozens of heaven immortals could break. After pondering for a moment, the female immortal's tones suddenly became very weak. "Why do you have to be so hostile? As long as High Province releases fellow Taoist Yao Yu and his people, Myriad Immortal Alliance is not willing to go to war for no reason." Wu Qi shook his head and said indifferently, "Don't use Yao Yu as an excuse anymore. That Taoist and his people are destined to become sacrifices to the ghost god. According to the law of Diyu, Yao Yu has a bad record, and what he has done has greatly violated the law of Diyu. If I don't punish him severely with torture, will you, the itinerant cultivators, still take me, the human emperor of Diyu, seriously?" The female immortal and her companions looked at each other, then softened their tone at the same time and chattered with Wu Qi. They did not curse or challenge him. Instead, they put on a calm posture and tried to reason with Wu Qi. The female immortal even played the emotional card. She told Wu Qi in a choked voice that there were many young children among Reverend Yao Yu's people, and if they were all sacrificed to the ghost god, didn't Wu Qi think it was a little inhumane? Wu Qi frowned and exchanged a puzzled glance with Yu Mu, who was standing next to him. These immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance did not match the aggressive manner of the 3 black-clothed Taoist emissaries a few days ago. Were the immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance so easy to talk to? Not to mention that they had just killed a team of scouts from Ningbo City, and they did not show any mercy when they killed them. Could it be that they were frightened by Yu Huai's cruel means? Were they stunned by Wu Qi's nasty curses? Or were they stunned by the city's defense? Dozens of heaven immortals hovered in midair, chattering like a swarm of flies as they kept blaming the officials of High Province for the destruction of Mount Moon Gazing. They had deliberately raised their voices, and their voices spread through the city's defense, so that the hundreds of thousands of people in the city could hear them clearly. First, they begged with gentle voices, but when they saw the indifferent look on Wu Qi and Yu Zong's faces, their tone changed from begging to threatening. Suddenly, they became stern, pointing fingers at Wu Qi and Yu Mu, telling them with the most direct adjectives that if they did not release Reverend Yao Yu's people, Myriad Immortal Alliance would definitely wipe out High Province, killing everyone in Ningbo City. Wu Qi still paid no attention to these heaven immortals. If they had put up a desperate stance, Wu Qi would have been interested in sending them to reincarnation. But, although these heaven immortals were aggressive at first, they became as weak as quails in a storm, and Wu Qi did not even have the thought of bullying them. Although the tone of these heaven immortals was stern, Wu Qi could tell that behind the stern mask, there was a clear lack of confidence. If Wu Qi rushed out of the city's defense and attacked these heaven immortals, as long as he killed one of them, the others would definitely flee in different directions, and he would have to chase them all over the world. That would be troublesome. But, these heaven immortals did not attack, nor did they flee. Instead, they just stood there, muttering under their breath. This was really offensive. What were they trying to do? With a wry smile, Wuqi gestured at the dozens of heaven immortals and said, "Forget it, it's not worth wasting my breath on you. All military officers with a cultivation base above the first Panga heaven, listen up. Charge out with me and kill all these bastards." Among the private guards brought by Yumu, dozens of military officers with a cultivation base strong enough to fight against heaven immortals answered with a thunderous roar. One after another, they crushed bone talismans to enchant themselves with various defensive mechanisms, then stepped on purple clouds and rushed toward the heaven immortals with Wuqi. Looking down from this height, even the largest ocean on Panga continent was only the size of a mung bean. This was the outer heavenly realm of Panga continent. Countless shooting stars were streaking across the sky, and from time to time, large patches of aurora could be seen. 3 immortals clad in golden Taoist robes hovered in the sky on clouds, their powerful divine sense locking down Ningbo City. "Why so careful?" said one of them discontentedly. "It's just a 9th grade province. Why should we be so careful? Even if they have an ambush, how can they hurt us? Let those good-for-nothings waste their breath and disgrace myriad immortal alliance for no reason. It doesn't matter if they lose face, as long as they don't lose their lives." Another golden-robed Taoist said coolly, "The sovereign is severely wounded now. If we are not careful, we may be killed by King Yangqiu's army. We only have one life, so we'd better be cautious." "You're right. What we've done this time will surely shake Yu and the Celestial Court. If we're not careful enough, it would be a light punishment for us to be smashed to pieces." The last Taoist took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Look, Ningbo City is densely covered with armored soldiers and all kinds of city defense equipment. It seems that they are well prepared. But, such a force may be useful against some heaven immortals, but against us? Humph. Ha." The 3 Taoists burst into laughter. They could not help but shake their heads as they watched Wuqi and the dozens of military officers beat those heaven immortals and make them flee with their hands covering their heads. As soon as Wuqi made his move, he unleashed a vast sheet of Shen energy that blanketed the surrounding void. Under his control, the military officers could see those heaven immortals clearly, but the heaven immortals were so confused that they could not even tell which direction they were facing, and their overall strength had been reduced by at least 60%. These heaven immortals did not have very high cultivation bases, and they did not have any powerful immortal items. Therefore, in less than a quarter of an hour, Wuqi and his men had killed all the heaven immortals except for 3 female immortals. The 3 female immortals were captured alive by Yu Miao's guards, who all had strange smiles on their faces. Wuqi knew that female immortals or cultivators were very popular among the nobles in Diyu, and everyone was proud to have a few female immortals or cultivators as their slaves. The 3 female immortals all had the cultivation base of 30th tier, and they were all good-looking. It was a good idea to keep them for Yu Miao's use, and if he sold them, he could get at least a few large flying ships. Wuqi paid no attention to what these guards had done. It was the unspoken rule of Panga continent, and he did not have the consciousness of being a savior. He just wondered why the Alliance had sent these unruly heaven immortals here. They had even killed 12 soldiers of Ningbo City and tried to trap Wuqi and his company with the art of controlling corpses. But, the cultivation base of these heaven immortals was too weak, and they did not have any fighting strength. So, what were they doing here? Even if they were here to spy on the enemy, did they really need to sacrifice dozens of heaven immortals? High up in the sky, 3 golden-robed Taoists put a jade slip that could record images into their sleeves at the same time. One of them sighed and said, "We have all the evidence. High Province has innocently abducted our allies, and our allies are so indignant that they have gathered in Ningbo City to demand the return of the captives. But, Ningbo City has brazenly killed 57 of our allies and captured 3 alive. We have no choice but to retaliate." Another golden-robed Taoist nodded and said, "When they attacked just now, I paid attention to the surroundings, and there was no unusual movement in or outside Ningbo City. If we strike now, we can catch them off guard. Even if there is an ambush, we can still escape smoothly. The last golden-robed Taoist nodded heavily. The three of them exchanged a glance, then stood in three positions and unleashed their gold immortal energy at the same time. A meteor with a diameter of 30,000 miles swept past them, but was forcibly imprisoned by the gold immortal energy. Accompanied by a dull rumble, the meteor was compressed to 100 miles in diameter. The three golden-robed Taoists waved their hands casually, and the meteor suddenly turned into a beam of strong light, whistling down from the sky and falling to the ground. The three golden-robed Taoists followed closely behind, performing incantation gestures and reciting spells with both hands, laying out layer after layer of powerful restrictive spells on the meteor. Suddenly, a small sun appeared in the sky, illuminating millions of miles around Ningbo City. Chapter 603. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the three gold immortals had deployed 36,000 layers of powerful defensive spells on the tiny planet. The three gold immortals pushed the planet all the way to the sky less than 3,000 miles away from Ningbo City, and only then did they suddenly flee. From the time they began to attack until the planet was less than 3,000 miles away from Ningbo City, only 3 seconds had passed in total. As the three gold immortals had expected when they were discussing in the sky, they pushed the star down toward Ningbo City. The sudden appearance of the star and the strong light attracted everyone's attention, and they fled from behind the star. No one could detect them with their divine sense, and no one tried to stop them. Perhaps the black-robed man sitting on the stone chair on the mountain had the overall strength to stop them, but when he heard that the new celestial ambassador sent by the celestial court to Liangzhu was Liu Bang, the king of Han, and his three heroes, he lost control of his mind, transformed into a wisp of black smoke and fled into the distance. After the enigmatic black-robed man left, the 36 generals under him were also attracted by the strong light, so no one could find the whereabouts of the three golden-robed Taoists. Wu Qi stared blankly at the planet that came crashing down from the sky with a threatening aura. He felt his body stiffen like a frog being stared at by a cobra. Wu Qi's muscles tightened, and he wanted to flee as fast as he could, but his muscles were so stiff that he could not move. He could only watch as the planet approached inch by inch with an aura of destruction. The planet, which was 30,000 miles in diameter, was compressed to only 100 miles in size, and was falling straight down from the extremely high void. Its weight and impact were enough to kill all living beings below the realm of gold immortal in an instant. Even with Wu Qi's current peak rank, 1 physical cultivation base, he would not dare to face this whistling star head-on. What was worse was that the three gold immortals had cast 36,000 restrictive spells on the planet, which consumed 80% of their immortal energy. It was the equivalent of 3 gold immortals unleashing their full power on the star. Even those who were as strong as the 3 gold immortals would not be willing to fight the star head-on. Among the 36,000 layers of restrictive spells, several thousand of them were special immortal techniques that could absorb energy from the outside world. As the star fell straight down from the sky, the astral wind, heavenly fire, aurora, thunderclouds, xianbing, magnetic force, and many other energies along the way were constantly absorbed by these restrictive spells. The star, which was already extremely compressed and had a density dozens of times greater than Mercury, had absorbed a tremendous amount of energy and become as hard as diamond. Even an ordinary upper-grade immortal item would not be as strong as it. The aura of a gold immortal, coupled with the aura of destruction brought by the falling star, had made Wu Qi, an expert with a peak-level fleshly body, stiff and unable to move, let alone the others. Yu Zong, as well as all the soldiers and civilians in Ningbo City, stood stiffly where they were, staring blankly at the rapidly approaching star. In a great hall next to the drill ground, 9 oracles of Yu Clan, whose sleeves were embroidered with different numbers of golden suns, up to 7 at most, rushed out of the great hall with Yu Huai, whose body was stiff and whose body was drenched in cold sweat. The 9 oracles glanced at the falling star at the same time, and Chi-Chi let out a long, furious roar. The all-out attack of 3 gold immortals, who had been accumulating power for a long time, made the 9 oracles, who were strong enough to fight against gold immortals, panic for a moment. They were different from immortals. The power of immortals resided in their bodies, and they could unleash powerful immortal spells with a casual wave of their hands, which had a terrible power that could split mountains and split the earth. On the other hand, the oracles of Yu's Directorate of Celestials mostly borrowed the power of the outside world, the power of ghosts and deities, and all kinds of holy spirits. They needed a certain amount of time to unleash their strongest power. If they were given enough time, they could instantly kill immortals of the same level as them with all kinds of strange curses and mystic arts. But, in a head-on confrontation, immortals could also kill an unguarded oracle in an instant. Of the 9 oracles who escorted Yu Huai out of the Great Hall, the strongest was a 7 Suns oracle, whose cultivation base was comparable to a 5th-tier gold immortal. However, that was after he had made sufficient preparations and borrowed all the power of ghosts and deities he worshipped. His current cultivation base was only comparable to a 17th-tier gold immortal, and his fleshly body was extremely weak. He did not have the courage to resist the falling star. But, after all, they still had the overall strength of the lowest-level gold immortal. Although they could not resist the falling star, they were more than capable of escaping. Amidst Yu Huai's sharp rebuke, the 9 oracles escorted him and sped up the city wall in a blur. Dozens of wisps of black smoke shot out of their sleeves, which rolled up Wu Qi, Yu Miao, and the other important figures of Hai Province, as well as the elite guards of Yu Clan's private army, who were standing stiffly on the wall. Then, they turned into a gray beam and sped away. The power of a gold immortal was not to be underestimated. Roaring furiously, the 9 oracles brought hundreds of people and flew tens of thousands of miles away in a flash. A muffled rumble rang out from afar as the small star hit Ningbo City. An intense bluish-purple light dominated the world. Everyone felt as if their bodies had become transparent. The bluish-purple light passed through everyone's bodies, bringing intense pain to their internal organs. Except for those with strong fleshly bodies like Wu Qi, who could resist the power of the light, everyone, including Oracle Chi-Chi and Yu Huai, coughed up blood. As soon as the blood came out of their mouths, it immediately turned into smoke and drifted away. Their body fluids were boiling. If it were not for the fact that they had the power of ghosts and deities, which made their bodies far stronger than ordinary mortals, the strong light that came from tens of thousands of miles away was enough to kill everyone except for Wu Qi and the other generals. Even the 9 powerful oracles of the Yu clan could not withstand the attack of the strong light. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials still had the fleshly bodies of mortals, and their power came from ghosts and deities. They were extremely old, and their fleshly bodies were on the verge of decay. The strong light pierced through their bodies and caused terrible damage to them. All of them had lost decades to hundreds of years of their lifespans because of the damage they had sustained. Originally, these oracles did not have much lifespan left, and now, they relied more on various spirit herbs to prolong their lifespan to support the vitality in their bodies. After losing so much of their lifespan, the 9 oracles cursed in unison. Towering resentment transformed into black ghosts and spread out from their bodies, carrying the crowd and fleeing into the distance at an even faster speed. In the blink of an eye after the first wave of strong light, a terrible bluish-purple shockwave, which contained countless destructive forces of nature, such as thunderbolts, xian bing, heavenly flame, aurora, magnetic force, and nether force, came rushing over. Wherever the shockwave passed, the earth turned into a desert, mountains were razed to the ground, rivers and lakes dried up, and all the living beings along the way were crushed to powder. Even their souls were turned into nothingness by the natural force of the shockwave. In just the blink of an eye, Wu Qi and the others had fled another 100,000 miles away. The few oracles of the Yu clan had finished reciting the incantation, and a huge celestial fiend god emerged over their bodies at the same time, emanating a dreadful aura. 9 gigantic celestial fiend gods raised their hands at the same time. Amidst a deep, muffled howl, sets of armors made of different materials, such as bone armors, stone armors, and scales, appeared on the bodies of Wu Qi and the others. Shockwaves came sweeping over from behind, blotting the sky and blotting out the earth and sky, pulling Wu Qi and his company into it. The group of several hundred men was swept away like a cluster of dandelions in a hurricane, unable to resist at all. Huge rocks kept slamming into their bodies, but the armors protected them, shattering all the rocks into dust and sand. Countless thunderbolts smashed on their bodies, and large balls of flame surrounded them. From time to time, cold and evil forces would come whistling over, and magnetic force, colorful aurora, and many other destructive forces would come smashing down. However, with the armors released by the 9 celestial fiend gods, although Wu Qi and the others were dizzy from the impact, they did not suffer any actual harm. They tumbled and rolled in the frightening shockwave for the time it took to finish a pot of tea. But to Wu Qi and the others, this short period of time felt like 10,000 years. Under the protection of the 9 celestial fiend gods, the group rushed out of the shockwave safely, and what came next was endless light and heat. The purple-red flames swirled around them, burning so fiercely that even the armors worn by Wu Qi and the others could not withstand it. Many of the armors were cracking noisily and had many cracks on them. The 7 Suns priest roared. His old and shriveled body suddenly swelled up like a balloon. In an instant, he regained his youth, his muscles became plump and smooth, and his hunched back straightened. He had transformed into an 8-foot-tall man in the prime of his life. Clenching his fists, the priest suddenly thrust one palm toward the sky and the other toward the ground, causing the surrounding void to tremble. He shouted, "Flames in the world should not be so hot." As the old oracle gave a loud cry, the power of law within 1,000 miles was slightly twisted. The purple-red flames were still there, but their temperature had dropped to only 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. Although it was scorching hot, it could no longer hurt Wu Qi and the others. Distorting the laws was a power that only experts of Gold Immortal Realm could possess. The other 8 oracles had also struck out with all kinds of means. Relying on the protection of the 9 great oracles, Wu Qi and the others managed to escape the fatal blow caused by the meteor. 2 hours later, Wu Qi and the others returned to Ningbo City with their heads and faces covered in dust. There was no more Ningbo City in this world. The place where the city once stood had become a huge crater, 3,000 miles deep and more than 50,000 miles in diameter. The water of the Great Eastern Ocean was pouring into the crater through a gap that was 10,000 miles wide. Everything in Ningbo City, the hundreds of thousands of civilians, the 30,000 new recruits, Yu Miao's 3,000 private guards, the middle and lower level officials in the city, and the large amount of armaments that Wu Qi and Yu Miao had spent a lot of money to purchase, were gone. Fortunately, the 5 counties of Hai Province were tens of thousands of miles away from Ningbo City. Although the impact of the meteor had caused some damage to them, there were not many casualties. Ningbo City, on the other hand, was completely destroyed. Wu Qi's eyes were blazing with rage. He threw his head back and roared furiously, then threw a heavy punch down. The seawater that was pouring into the pit was pushed back, and the waves that were tens of thousands of miles long rose into the air, forming a huge water screen in the void. Myriad Immortal Alliance, I will uproot you and leave no one alive. Chapter 604. More than 2 months had passed since the destruction of Ningbo City, and the aftermath was still rolling across Zhong Province. On that day, the city was destroyed, and more than 1 million people were killed in the city and the surrounding towns. Putting aside the loss of civilians, 1 million people was nothing more than a drop of water in the vast ocean when compared to the 300 provinces ruled by Zhong Province. What was worse was the army of 100,000 soldiers hiding outside Ningbo City, personally led by Bo Yunting, the beloved son of Bo Zhongfu, the new prefecture overseer of Zhong Province. Except for Bo Yunting and the 12 second Panga Heaven generals under his command, the army of 100,000 was wiped out by the sudden attack of the stars. The army of 100,000 was not the local army of Zhong Province. After the case of Feng Lingling, the local army of Zhong Province had been ordered to disband, and all the soldiers had returned to their homeland to retire. These 100,000 elite soldiers were the private army that Bo Zhongfu had brought from the fief of his clan, the private army sent by his clan to secure his position as the prefecture overseer of Zhong Province. The private army of 100,000 was made of gold, and each of them had cost Bo Zhongfu an astronomical sum of money. As a result, the army of 100,000 was reduced to a wisp of smoke outside Ningbo City, and only a dozen generals were spared. Bo Zhongfu was furious, extremely furious. Before he became the prefecture overseer of Zhong province, he was the confidant of the current human emperor, and had a very strong network of contacts in Liangzhu, the capital of Diyu. After his private army of 100,000 was wiped out, Bo Zhongfu sent a memorial to Liangzhu, which immediately shocked Diyu and Qiqi. A large number of experts and secret agents swarmed out of Yuxiong Plain, searching the world and hunting down the immortals and itinerant cultivators of the Alliance. In just over 2 months, the immortals of Ascending Immortal Hall and Hidden Immortal Hall had been fighting with the experts sent by the Yu dynasty all over Panga continent, causing the sky to fall and the earth to crack. There was a faint hint of the legendary cataclysm. No one knew what had gotten into the myriad Immortal Alliance's mind. After the massacre in Ningbo city of Hai province, they had set fires all over Panga continent in just over 2 months. As a result, more than 200 lower-grade provinces were attacked by the same stars as the one in Hai province. Only 13 of the cities were protected by experts, and they were lucky enough to escape the attack of the stars. The other 200 cities were completely razed to the ground. The Diyu dynasty became even more furious and sent more experts to hunt down the immortals of the Union of 10,000 Immortals. It was even rumored that some imperial sinecures, who lived in seclusion in the imperial palace and had not shown their faces for many years, had sneaked out of Yuxiong Plain. Their targets were the elders and core members of Myriad Immortal Alliance's Divine Hall, and they had even fought and destroyed many places on Panga continent. The situation was slightly out of control. No one knew why the immortals of Ascending Immortal Hall and Hidden Immortal Hall of the Union of 10,000 Immortals had gone crazy. Under the circumstances of being attacked by Diyu dynasty in all directions, they actually formed groups to attack the cities and towns of Diyu. On the other hand, the experts sent by Diyu dynasty began to attack indiscriminately after suffering a series of defeats. When the human emperor's edict was issued to the whole Panga continent, all the provinces under the heavens swarmed into action, and their armies began to hunt down all itinerant cultivator powers in an orderly manner. For a moment, Panga continent was engulfed in flames of war, rivers of blood flowed, and countless itinerant cultivators and demons were slaughtered. As soon as Diyu dynasty's huge war machine was activated, Myriad Immortal Alliance and some other itinerant cultivator powers immediately suffered a heavy blow. But, none of this had anything to do with Wuqi, or Hai province. In this storm, Hai province was just a prelude. After Ningbo city was destroyed, no one paid any attention to Hai province. While cursing, Yumu took a huge sum of money from Yumu and began to rebuild Ningbo city. The new city was built on the original site of Ningbo city. Like a living being, Panga continent had a very strong ability to repair and heal itself. A huge crater, thousands of miles deep and 50,000 miles in diameter, was blasted out of Ningbo city, and the massive damage was completely healed in just 1 month. Although the terrain was very different from before, at least it was flat and fertile land, with only some scar-like mountain ranges and hills in some areas. The new Ningbo city was built on top of the old one. With Yu Miao's support, Yumu had secretly transported 5 million people from Zhong province to replenish the city. The newly built city was bound to be more prosperous than the old one. Wuqi did not care about these civil affairs. After selecting 30,000 young men from the newly transported immigrants and reorganizing the army of the military court, Wuqi packed them up and brought them to East Sea County, where they would be drilled by the elites of scouting office led by Yan Bugue. When the struggle between the Yu dynasty and Myriad Immortal Alliance on Panga continent was in full swing, the day Wuqi had been looking forward to finally arrived. On the 3rd day of the 9th month of the Yu dynasty, the world was filled with a murderous aura, and it was a day of great calamity. On such a day, everything was inauspicious, and the only thing that mattered was sacrifice. Every year on the 3rd day of the 9th month, the imperial family of Diyu would go to the ancestral temple for a grand sacrificial ceremony, and many powerful clans and powers in Diyu would also hold their own blood sacrificial ceremonies. With the murderous aura, the void around Panga continent would become fragile and unstable, allowing the ghosts and deities from the otherworldly realms to project stronger power onto the continent with greater ease. Offering sacrifices to these ghosts and deities on this day would also bring more benefits. Of course, the sacrificial offerings had to be properly selected, and they had to be the ones with the strongest intelligence and the most abundant blood energy. Only then could they win the favor of these ghosts and deities. What else could be the sacrificial offering with the strongest intelligence and the most abundant blood energy in the world besides human beings? Every year on the 3rd day of the 9th month, even though the human emperor had repeatedly forbidden the use of human beings as blood sacrifices, countless civilians were still secretly killed as sacrifices. At this time of the year, all the prisoners and exiled sinners in all the provinces and counties of Dayu would be wiped out. There were even underground trades, where these sinners who had committed serious crimes would be bought with a huge sum of money, just like buying pigs and dogs in the market. Wu Qi had also bought a huge number of sacrifices. He had spent half of the money he had obtained from wiping out Mount Moon gazing, buying 120,000 white horses, 120,000 black horses, 90,000 white cows, 90,000 black cows, 60,000 white sheep, and 60,000 black sheep. It took him 1.5 months just to buy these sacrifices. Fortunately, the land in Zhong province was fertile, with countless pastures and a large number of livestock for sale. Through Yu Mu's connections, Wu Qi managed to buy so many livestock before the 3rd day of the 9th month, and transported them to the outskirts of East Sea City in time. A huge sacrificial altar was erected outside of East Sea City. The densely packed stone pillars were filled with animals that were about to be sacrificed. On the altar, thousands of cultivators from Reverend Yao Yu's clan were lying stiffly on the ground. His entire body was restrained by the immortal detaining needles, and he could not even move his eyeballs. His eyes were wide open, filled with fear and despair, and his lips were moving rapidly, but he could not make a single sound. Princess Zhanglu appeared in front of Reverend Yao Yu with Lord Xiansheng, Catfish Flood Dragon, and the others. Princess Zhanglu, who had inherited the Tao of Ancient God, would be the officiant of today's ceremony. When Reverend Yao Yu saw the true faces of Princess Zhanglu and the others, especially when he saw Gold Horn and Silver Horn, the 2 dragon pythons coiled around Wu Qi's waist, his expression became very interesting. It was an indescribable mixture of fear, despair, anger, and resentment, and an expression that could only be produced after being carefully mixed with a deadly poison. Wu Qi walked slowly up to Reverend Yao Yu, lowered his voice, and said with a smile, "This is the truth behind the destruction of Mount Moon gazing. You shouldn't have messed with my wife. You shouldn't have messed with my brothers and friends. Rest in peace, for you will be the last to die." After a brief pause, Wu Qi nodded with a smile and said, "Believe it or not, Myriad Immortal Alliance is going to war for you. Well, the war on Panga continent is all because of you. I know you know that asking us to hand over you and your people is just an excuse. At least, Myriad Immortal Alliance is willing to use you as an excuse. You should feel very comforted and gratified, don't you think?" Shaking his head mockingly, Wu Qi sighed and said in a low voice, "Those who belong to an organization are indeed arrogant and domineering. They are different from us." Reverend Yao Yu stared at Wu Qi with a hint of expectation in his eyes. The complicated expression on his face had disappeared, replaced by a pleading look amidst despair. He tried his best to turn his eyes, trying to give Wu Qi a wink. Wu Qi turned to look at the few young children lying beside Reverend Yao Yu. They should be the youngest descendants of Reverend Yao Yu's clan. The corner of Wu Qi's mouth twitched slightly as he took a deep breath. Looking at the gray sun in the sky, he said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, but if I don't remove the roots, the weeds will grow again. I won't give your children the hope of avenging me in the future." With a deep smile on his face, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "I've heard too many stories like this. If I don't remove the roots, I may die in the hands of your descendants in the future. So, it is certain that your entire clan will be cut off. Perhaps, these few children around you have the aptitude to become primordial immortals. How can I take such a risk?" Reverend Yao Yu's eyes suddenly turned grayish-white like those of a dead fish, and all the vitality in his body vanished in an instant. He was still alive, but he had lost all his vitality. An earthy yellow murderous aura emerged out of thin air, and everyone could feel the vibration coming from the void. The void around Pangu continent gradually began to shake, and the spatial organization became weaker. When the blood sacrifice was used to summon the ghosts and deities, the energy required for them to come to Pangu continent was greatly reduced. When the sun rose to the center of the sky, the murderous aura reached its peak. The earthy yellow murderous aura pervaded the void, completely absorbing the sunlight. The third day of the 9th month of this year happened to be the day when the murderous aura would surge once every 60 years. The murderous aura in the world was 10,000 times greater than usual. On such a day, the common people of Pangu continent would hide in their homes and never go out to work. On the other hand, many of the powerful clans regarded this day as a gift from the heaven, and they would offer sacrifices that were 100 times more abundant than usual to the ghosts and deities. Wu Qi, Lord Xiansheng, and the others retreated to the bottom of the altar, leaving Princess Zhanglu alone, clad in an oracle's robe, standing upright on the top of the altar. When the sunlight completely disappeared, Princess Zhanglu raised the bone knife in her hand and gently stabbed it into the void. Miserable howls rang out from all over the place as the hundreds of thousands of animals around the altar had their throats cut by an invisible force at the same time. Blood sprayed out, and a pungent smell rose into the sky. Chapter 605. Under the influence of the murderous aura, the blood of the hundreds of thousands of slaughtered animals kept spraying out of their bodies, turning into fountains of blood that rose into the sky. Countless fist-sized beads of blood hovered in the air, turning the world into a blood-red hue. Countless murderous auras were attracted by the aura and kept being injected into the beads of blood. A strong smell of blood pervaded the air, and the sticky smell seemed to have substance as it kept drilling into people's bodies through their pores. Peppermint and Angelica, who stood beside Wu Qi, turned pale with fear, and dared not to raise their heads. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Catfish stared greedily at the countless beads of blood in the sky and the countless corpses of livestock on the ground, their saliva oozing out of their mouths at the same time. Catfish was more concerned about her image, so she used a handkerchief to stop the saliva at the corner of her mouth. Gold Horn and Silver Horn, on the other hand, did not care so much. They opened their mouths greedily, saliva dripping down like a spring. Ao Buzan, too, poked his head out of Wu Qi's clothes stealthily. He gave Gold Horn and Silver Horn a fearful look and cursed under his breath, then gave the beads of blood a greedy look, shook his head, and shrank his head back into the clothes. On the altar, Princess Zhanglu held the bone knife in her hand and began to recite a complicated and abstruse incantation. Rings of gray ripples spread out from her body, transforming into a hazy shadow that soared into the sky. A few miles above the ground, large dark clouds began to gather and spin rapidly, with gusts of chilly wind blowing out of them. Shrill howls could be heard coming from the dark clouds, and gradually, vague shadows began to emerge from them. Wu Qi frowned. The ghosts and deities that came out of the dark clouds looked like a group of malnourished little ghosts, and their aura was at most that of heaven immortals. Most of them were little ghosts and deities in the realm of nascent divinity, nascent soul, or even Jin Dan realm. He shook his head discontentedly. Today was the day of the most murderous aura, and countless clans across Pangu continent were holding sacrificial ceremonies at the same time. Perhaps those powerful ghosts and deities had gone to those powerful and wealthy clans to enjoy the rich blood feasts, and would not come to East Sea County, a small place where the first blood sacrifice was being held. Damn it, you're so weak and you still want to take advantage of us. Gold Horn and Silver Horn sprung up into the sky at the same time. They opened their mouths greedily and unleashed a large sheet of bright light, swallowing those imps and deities who had cautiously sneaked out of the swirling clouds. Shrill and miserable howls kept ringing out. These little ghosts and deities from the outer domain never dreamed that they would not get any benefits, but instead become nourishment for Gold Horn and Silver Horn. Perhaps, under the heaven, only Wu Qi and his companions could have such a ferocious attitude. On Pangu continent, no other rich and powerful clan would commit such an unbearable act. Just because the ghosts and deities who were summoned here were too weak, they were treated as dishes to go with wine. That was too ferocious. The powerful and influential clans on Pangu continent worshipped these ghosts and deities with great reverence. Even the weakest ghosts and deities could get some leftovers from their sacrifices. Only Wu Qi and his companions. No one could describe what the people around Wuqi had done. You invited them to a banquet, and then cooked them as dishes to go with wine. That was too vile of an act. Ao Buzan watched as Goldhorn and Silverhorn ate and drank happily. These ghosts and deities were the aggregates of the purest energy, and in the hands of those fiend immortals and demon immortals, they were the materials to refine magical treasures. For Ao Buzan, these ghosts and deities were all spirit pills that could greatly replenish his energy and help him quickly restore his original cultivation base. Opening his mouth, Ao Buzan leaped out of Wuqi's body. Now a foot long and as thick as a thumb, Ao Buzan roared with a tremendous suction force coming out of his mouth. With a momentum no weaker than that of Goldhorn and Silverhorn, he began to crazily devour the little ghosts and deities that flew out of the swirling clouds. As soon as Ao Buzan made his move, Catfish could not stand it any longer. She simply transformed into her true form and flew up into the sky, opening her mouth thousands of feet wide and crazily devouring the ghosts and deities who had just flown out of the swirling clouds. Lord Xiansheng also made his move. He transformed into a flying dragon and began to devour these pure energy aggregates. Wuqi was taken aback, and he could not stand it any longer. These energy aggregates were also very beneficial to him. Chaotic energy could even digest dirt and rocks, let alone these little ghosts and deities who had gathered powerful energy themselves. Throwing his head back and letting out a long roar, Wuqi exercised a Dharma idol divine ability. His body abruptly grew to 1,000 feet tall, and he spread his arms. A beam of black light shot out of his chest, which looked like a small black hole, and began to crazily suck the little ghosts and deities that had flown out of the swirling clouds. The 7 Foundation elevating technique devoured chaotic energy much more ferociously than that of Goldhorn and Silverhorn. As soon as Wuqi made his move, at least 40 of the 100 little ghosts and deities were devoured by him, and only the remaining 60 were shared by Goldhorn and Silverhorn. Standing under the altar, the faces of Su Qin, Yen Bugue, and 1,000 elites of scouting office darkened. With his hands clasped behind his back, Su Qin shook his head and muttered, "This is the so-called collapse of etiquette and music, and the loss of morality. You offered sacrifices to the ghosts and deities of heaven and earth, and you devoured them just because their overall strength was a little weak. Tevis. Even those who run black shops are not as ferocious as you." Shaking his head, Su Qin suddenly laughed and said, well, I'll be shameless this year. If I can make these ghosts and deities into the heavenly star 5 ghosts, they will be much stronger than the Een ghosts I obtained after those people died." Laughing, Su Qin waved all 10 of his fingers. Countless tiny silver beams shot out from his fingertips and interwove into a huge net of light in midair, scooping up dozens of little ghosts and deities, whose cultivation base was roughly in the realm of nascent divinity. Smilingly, he shackled them into thumb-sized spirit pearls and put them into his sleeve. With Su Qin's move, the little ghosts and deities that came out of the whirlpool were struck with a bloody misfortune. Su Qin's net had covered an area of 100 miles in circumference, so dense that not even a drop of water could escape. Initially, there was still hope for 1 or 2 of them to escape from the devouring of Wuqi and the others, but with Su Qin's net, there was no way for them to escape. Yen Bugue's face darkened as he murmured in a low voice, "Collapse of etiquette and music, and loss of morality. Old mister, aren't you taking the side of the evildoer by doing this? TSK, let's not talk about each other. Which one of us is better than the other?" These little ghosts and deities had no effect on Yen Bugue and the others, who had cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture. Therefore, the 1,000 elites of scouting office stood firmly where they were and did not participate in the feast of ghosts and deities. They barely managed to preserve a trace of righteousness in this world where etiquette and music had collapsed and morality had fallen. Nearly 8,000 little ghosts and deities came out of the whirlpool, but they were all devoured and captured by Wuqi and the others. The combined power of these 8,000 little ghosts and deities was roughly equal to the total magical power of a middle-grade heaven immortal, which was negligible to the current Wuqi. However, the enormous soul power contained in these little ghosts and deities had brought great benefits to Wuqi. His magical power and cultivation base had only increased slightly, but the strength of his divine soul had been tripled. With the strength of his divine soul tripled, Wu Qi's divine sense was now comparable to that of a real first-tier heaven immortal. As long as he refined and purified the newly obtained divine soul power with his true flame of life, his overall strength would definitely rise by a great margin. It took him nearly an hour to devour all the little ghosts and deities, and finally, a powerful ghost and deity began to emerge from the whirlpool. A ghost and deity with 6 curved goat horns on its head, its body covered with white hair, and its body vague and indistinct, and possessing the cultivation base of a supreme-grade heaven immortal, swayed out of the whirlpool. As soon as the ghost and deity appeared, it threw its head back and roared, "All offerings, mine, all of you, get the hell out of the way, Lao Tzu." This was the most common scene among ghosts and deities, where the strong preyed on the weak. When a powerful ghost and deity appeared, the weaker ghosts and deities would have to retreat and sacrifice all the offerings for the strong ghosts and deities to enjoy. Once the strong ghosts and deities appeared, they would certainly unleash their aura to drive away the weaker ghosts and deities. But, after the powerful ghost and deity threw his head back and howled a few times, when he lowered his head and looked around, he was struck dumb. The area around the altar was clean, with countless fragrant blood beads and fleshy bodies waiting for him to enjoy. But, those annoying little ghosts and deities were nowhere to be seen. The simple mind of the ghost and deity could not react in time. He glanced left and right, but did not see a single little ghost or deity. Only Wu Qi and his companions were standing under the altar, looking at him with great reverence. Laughing dryly, the ghost and deity murmured in a low voice, "Lao Tzu is the first one to come today." Princess Zhangli narrowed her eyes at the ghost and deity, who had the cultivation base of a third-tier heaven immortal, and quietly slit the neck of one of Reverend Yao Yu's clan members with the bone knife. The man had the cultivation base of a 30th-tier heaven immortal. His neck was slit by the bone knife, and his golden immortal blood was lifted up by a murderous aura, turning into hundreds of golden blood beads the size of fists and shooting into the sky. The ghost's eyes lit up as he roared, "Using an immortal as a sacrifice? Wonderful." The ghost deity stretched out his hand and grabbed the descendant of Reverend Yao Yu, who was slowly floating up from the altar. However, when his claws were about 100 feet away from the man, a series of black thunderbolts suddenly roared out from the swirling clouds behind him. A dreadful aura pressed down from the sky, and a gigantic shadow silently appeared behind the ghost god. The shadow gently slapped the ghost and sent him flying far away. Scram! The shadow only snorted indifferently. Countless lightning bolts and thunder roared out of his body, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Because of his appearance, the vicinity of East Sea City suddenly became pitch black, illuminated only by the occasional flashes of lightning. Wu Qi looked at the shadow with delight. It was a ghost of the realm of gold immortal, and an extremely powerful one at that. His true form had not appeared on Pangu continent yet, and he had come here through a projection of his power. Even his projection possessed the power of a gold immortal, which showed how powerful his true form was. It was because he was too powerful that he could not come here through the stable void around Pangu continent, and could only come here through a projection. Shrouded in a dark cloud, the ghost took a deep breath. All the blood droplets drifting in the void around him shot up into the sky, plunging into the dark cloud along with the corpses that had been sacrificed. Muffled chewing noises kept ringing out, and vague praises could be heard coming from within the thunderclouds. With a bone knife in hand, Princess Zhangli killed Reverend Yao Yu's clan members on the altar one by one. Finally, she pierced the blade through Reverend Yao Yu's forehead, fulfilling Princess Zhangli's vow to take revenge on him. Reverend Yao Yu and all his clan members flew up into the dark cloud. Accompanied by the praises, a great sheet of blood-red light shot down from the dark cloud and injected into the bodies of Yan Bugui and the 1,000 elites of scouting office. Standing next to Wu Qi, Lord Xiansheng and the others were also injected with the blood-red light, and their bodies began to tremble violently. Chapter 606. In Zhongning City, Wu Qi's fleshly body had been upgraded to the peak realm of a first-tier heaven immortal. Although the blood-red light fell on him, it could no longer strengthen his fleshly body, but was quickly digested by chaotic energy and turned into his magic power. On the other hand, Lord Xiansheng and his companions were far weaker than Wu Qi in terms of fleshly body and magic power. As they absorbed the boundless blood-red light, the strength of their fleshly bodies and magic power rose rapidly. Wu Qi could clearly sense that Lord Xiansheng's magic power was breaking through rapidly, from the 36th tier of Heaven Immortal Realm to the 27th tier in just a flash. His body was also making a series of crackling noises, as his fleshly body had benefited greatly. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Catfish, Buzen, Peppermint, and Angelica had all benefited greatly from the blood-red light. At the same time, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Catfish, and Buzen had their overall strength raised to the same level as Lord Xiansheng, while Peppermint and Angelica were forcibly raised to the level of 33rd tier Heaven Immortals. The two little girls screamed in horror. They could not control the enormous immortal energy that suddenly emerged in their bodies, and it was about to leak out. Su Qin gritted his teeth. Starlight flashed around him as his immortal energy rapidly rose from the 36th tier of the Heaven Immortal Realm to the 18th tier. He had cultivated painstakingly for more than 2,000 years, and his understanding of the heavenly Tao was far greater than that of others. All he lacked was the accumulation of immortal energy, so he had benefited the most. Yen Bugui and the 1,000 elites of Scouting Office, including Chi-Chi, exercised the true body of heaven and earth scripture. With the help of Princess Zhanglu, Yen Bugui obtained a large part of the blood-red light, and his cultivation base quickly rose to the same level as Lord Xiansheng, a 27th tier Heaven Immortal. As for the other 1,000 elites, they had broken through the 36th tier Heaven Immortal realm. 1,000 lower tier Heaven Immortals was already amazing enough. As the officiant, Princess Zhanglu alone enjoyed 30% of the blood-red light. A huge amount of power was continuously injected into her body. The power in her body and the power of the ghosts and gods seemed to originate from the same source. Therefore, when she received the power, she did not feel any pain at all. Her entire body was shrouded in 5-colored divine light. Princess Zhongli's long hair fluttered in the wind, and a dreadful aura of magic power spread out from her body. Her power rose rapidly, and it seemed that she was approaching Wu Qi's level. Boundless killing intent surged into the blood-red light. The killing intent was transformed by the blood-red light into energy that Wu Qi and the others could absorb. The cultivation bases of Princess Zhanglu and the others were still rising step by step. Their auras were getting stronger and stronger. Gradually, purple tribulation clouds started to gather in the sky. As Wu Qi and the others were cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture, their breakthroughs would not attract tribulation clouds. But when Lord Xiansheng and the other immortal cultivators broke through, tribulation clouds would naturally come to them. And in such a small area, there were so many people breaking through at the same time. On top of that, they were not just breaking through the first tier. The tribulation clouds they attracted were extremely dreadful, reaching the level of the consecutive gold immortal tribulations. The dreadful aura of tribulation rumbled down from the sky. Lord Xiansheng and the others turned pale, for there was no way they could withstand the bombardment of such a gold immortal tribulation at the moment. Wu Qi's expression changed abruptly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Everyone, split up at once. We need to be at least 1,000 miles away from each other to transcend our tribulations." Before Wu Qi's voice could fade away, the hazy black figure in the sky cried out in surprise, "Why are there so many immortal cultivators in the sacrificial ceremony of the human race? What a mess! Things on Pangu continent are getting more and more interesting." Accompanied by a deep roar, the huge black figure casually shot out a palm, and the tribulation thunder that filled the sky was smashed by his palm. The tribulation thunder that had been brewing in the tribulation cloud was grabbed by him and stuffed into his mouth. He chewed it like a bean and swallowed it in 2 mouthfuls. The gold immortal thunder tribulation seemed to be of great benefit to him. After swallowing the thunderbolts, his figure became much clearer. He nodded with satisfaction and cried out in a low voice, "Humans, if you can offer 360 more blood sacrifices of the same quality as today, or better, I'm willing to become the ancestral god of your clan and let you borrow my power." Laughing in a deep voice, the shadow said, "Oh, woman of the officiator, remember my real name. I am Lei Meng. When you have gathered the same offerings as today and hold the blood sacrifice, call out my real name directly, so that no one will come and compete with me. Hee, or you can hold 360 blood sacrifices at the same time, and I can become the ancestral god of your clan directly. Amidst a deep roar, Lei Meng slowly disappeared, and the vortex of clouds in the void shattered with a deafening rumble. Clearly, before he left, he had destroyed the void tunnel opened by Princess Xianglu with a spell. He did not want the ghosts and deities, who were as strong as him, to know that Wu Qi and the others had sacrificed immortals. Even the blood essence and souls of ordinary humans could bring great benefits to these ghosts and deities, let alone thousands of immortals and itinerant cultivators. Wu Qi glanced at Princess Xianglu and said with a frown, "Is it good to have an ancestral god?" Princess Xianglu turned into a ball of colorful light and flew in front of Wu Qi. Beaming with joy, she nodded and said, "Of course it's good to have an ancestral god. With an ancestral god, we can borrow his power directly. With the richness of the offerings we have offered, we can borrow up to 60% of his divine power. 60% of the divine power of a mighty ancestral god who was as strong as a top-tier gold immortal. Although it would cost countless offerings to borrow their power, it was worth it, right?" Reverend Yao Yu had borrowed a gold immortal item from Myriad Immortal Alliance to capture the green dome shark. It was the same principle. If one wanted to borrow the power and item that did not belong to him, he would have to pay the price. Nodding vigorously, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Then, I'll have to join the Yu's attack on Myriad Immortal Alliance with enthusiasm. By hunting those immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance, we can not only gain military credit, but also get more immortals to sacrifice to Lei Meng." "TSK, why do I feel like I'm a human trafficker?" Princess Xianglu just smiled cheerfully. The murderous aura gradually dissipated, and the golden sunlight sprinkled down from the sky. There was not even a trace of blood sacrifice left on the ground where a blood sacrifice had just been carried out. Princess Xianglu gently thrust out her palm, and the altar disappeared without a trace. Wherever the sun shone on, in the newly opened fields on the fertile soil, the newly sprouted sprouts were emitting a faint glow in the sunlight. The sea breeze blew over from the ocean, fluttering the clothes of Wu Qi and others. Looking at the towering golden-red wall of East Sea City in the distance, Wu Qi suddenly threw his head back and laughed. As Wu Qi laughed, Su Qin, whose cultivation base had skyrocketed, was the first to laugh. Strong starlight wheeled around him, and from time to time, a deep rumbling could be heard, as if the stars were rotating in the void and rubbing against the magnetic force in the outer domain. Yen Bugui laughed as well. With a leap, he leaped tens of miles into the air and threw out a punch. An invisible force swept away all the clouds within 100 miles. Lord Xiansheng let out a long laugh. With a wave of his hand, a halberd appeared in his hand. A dark cloud rose under his feet, carrying him up to Yen Bugui, who was showing off his prowess in the sky. Then, he swung the halberd and thrust it down toward Yen Bugui like a rainstorm. Yen Bugui cheered loudly. He swung his fist, which was stronger than diamonds, and met Lord Xiansheng's halberd head-on. For a moment, the air was filled with a cacophony of clanking and deafening rumbles that sounded like the rumbling of thunder. The people in East Sea City were so frightened that they all shut their doors and windows, not daring to come out. Ao Buzan's eyes were burning with envy. He dragged his 3-foot-long body and flew up into the sky, beckoning his front claw at Catfish Flood Dragon provocatively. "Ugly fish head, do you want to fight me?" "Hee, how many years has it been since Lao Tzu last fought someone? I'll let you have the chance to fight Lao Tzu's virginity after he was reborn." Catfish Flood Dragon's eyes turned green with anger. "Ugly? Damn you," she roared furiously. She swung her huge hammer, rolled up her sleeves, and charged at Xiang Ao while howling. A deafening rumble echoed out once again, and both men were locked in a fierce battle in midair. Catfish Flood Dragon's hammer was powerful and heavy, while Ao Buzan's body was made of iron. Both men fought head-on in midair, as if they were enemies. Goldhorn and Silverhorn exchanged a glance, then shrunk their heads and smacked their lips, then quickly swam toward East Sea City. Lei Meng had enjoyed all the offerings in the blood sacrifice just now, and the brothers were drooling. So, it was only natural that they wanted to find some delicious meat to feast on, or they would feel sorry for themselves. Panicked, Peppermint and Angelica ran up to Princess Zhang and Wu Qi. Because of the blood sacrifice, the two little girls had suddenly advanced from Jin Dan realm to 33rd tier heaven immortals. With their current cultivation base and divine sense, there was no way they could control such a tremendous power. Both sisters were so frightened that they burst into tears. Not daring to be careless, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang hastily cast a restrictive spell to lock up the enormous immortal energy in the sisters' bodies, allowing the immortal energy to gradually improve along with their cultivation base and comprehension of the Tao. Wu Qi finally understood that the power obtained from the blood sacrifice was too strong and too fast. For immortal cultivators, when their cultivation base and divine sense could not control the skyrocketing immortal energy, their bodies would explode and they would die. On the contrary, the warriors and oracles of the human race could use the blood sacrifice unscrupulously, and they would not have to face the same trouble as immortals. In any case, by using Reverend Yao Yu's entire clan and hundreds of thousands of livestock as the blood sacrifice, they had inadvertently attracted a mighty deity like Lei Meng, which had brought great benefits to East Sea County. Among the top-tier heaven immortals, there were Wu Qi and Princess Zhang. Among the 18th tier heaven immortals, there were Su Qin. Among the 27th tier heaven immortals, there were Lord Xiansheng, Catfish Flood Dragon, Eo Buzan, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Yan Bugue, and among the heaven immortals, there were 1,000 elites of scouting office. In Diyu, such a strength was already a power that only a third-grade province could possess. In addition to that, East Sea County had a population of 1,030,000 newly recruited soldiers, and a large amount of money and resources that Wu Qi had obtained from Mount Moon Gazing. Together with Su Qin, an imperial advisor who was proficient in government affairs, and Princess Zhang, who was resolute in killing and did not know what a soft-hearted person was, the development of East Sea County immediately entered the fast lane. A year later, East Sea County had become very different from before. During this year, Wu Qi had also devoted himself to the war between Diyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance, and had made countless contributions. Chapter 607. On Mount Black Duck, Wu Qi kicked the head of Taoist Fat Duck, the lord of Mount Black Duck, and sent it flying. The once picturesque Mount Black Duck was now stained with blood, and the corpses of cultivators were strewn all over the place. At least 400 cultivators in Taoist robes had been killed, and another 200 cultivators were kneeling obediently on the square on top of the mountain with their hands over their heads, surrounded by heavily armored soldiers who emanated a murderous aura. Laughing merrily, Huang Liang dragged a few young and beautiful female cultivators towards the square. As he walked, he shouted, "Your Excellency, these few girls are in their prime, and the oldest is only 19 years old. He, they are all virgins, and they are of the best quality." Wu Qi waved his hand, indicating that Huang Liang could do whatever he wanted with the few female cultivators. Huang Liang and the few hundred men lieutenants of Ningbo City were overjoyed. Without hesitation, they carried the few female cultivators and rushed into a pavilion off to the side. Before long, screams and begging filled the air, followed by the sound of bodies hitting each other and vague moans. The few young and beautiful female cultivators on Mount Black Duck were occupied by Huang Liang and a few other captains, and there were also several hundred beautiful serving ladies on the mountain. Wu Qi gave a few military officers nearby a hand signal. Immediately, they understood what he meant. Excitedly, they led groups of soldiers and rushed towards the serving girls, dragging them, who were crying and begging for mercy, into a pavilion off to the side. According to the military order of Diyu, adultery was strictly prohibited during the war, but immortals, their families, and servants were not protected by the military order. Even if it was a charming vixen who took the initiative to seduce you, and if a general of Diyu dared to have any improper conversation with her during the war, the military order of Diyu would have his head chopped off. But, no matter how many women related to immortals were raped and abducted during the war, the military order of Diyu would never protect these unlucky women. All the living beings under the heaven and earth were the living beings born on Pangu continent. They were all spirit beings protected by the heavenly Tao. Therefore, Yu had ordered them to be strictly protected. On the other hand, immortals were beyond the 3 realms, beyond the 5 elements. They had broken away from the category of humans, and even more so, they had violated the laws of the heavenly Tao. Therefore, Yu's military order only applied the cruelest methods of killing to the immortals, without the slightest bit of warmth. It had been a year since Wu Qi led the army from Haizhou to battle. In the Battle of Black Duck Mountain, Wu Qi led 3,000 private soldiers of the Yu family to besiege Black Duck Mountain for half a month before they managed to breach the mountain. They killed Daoist Fat Duck and all the high-level immortals and itinerant cultivators, and only captured about 200 itinerant cultivators below the nascent divinity realm. The soldiers had been engaged in a series of fierce battles, and there had been almost no rest for a year. So, Wu Qi simply allowed them to do whatever they wanted in order to improve their fighting strength and morale. Even if he strictly enforced military discipline and forbade these officers and soldiers from doing anything to these female cultivators and serving ladies, according to the laws of Great Yu, these female cultivators and serving ladies would still be sold into brothels, and their fates would not change. The massacre of Myriad Immortal Alliance had been going on for more than a year. After the blood sacrifice ceremony a year ago, Wu Qi had led dozens of elites of scouting office and 3,000 private soldiers of the Yu family to join the main force of Zhong province's army and sweep across the land. Last time, Bo Zhongfu had sent 100,000 private soldiers of the Bo clan to reinforce Ningbo city. He had wanted to establish his power in Zhong province, but in the end, the city was destroyed by the joint attack of 3 gold immortals, and the 100,000 elite soldiers were turned into smoke. Bo Zhongfu was so angry that he almost fainted. Myriad Immortal Alliance had destroyed more than 200 cities of 9th-grade provinces in a row, which infuriated human Emperor Yu, and he issued an edict to exterminate the alliance. Bo Zhongfu immediately mobilized his army to besiege the strongholds of itinerant cultivators in Zhong province, and the 3,000 soldiers led by Wu Qi were assigned to the left wing of the army. While Wu Qi was besieging Black Duck Mountain, Bo Zhongfu's third son, Bo Yunting, was leading tens of thousands of soldiers to besiege Blue Phoenix Rock, which was 30,000 miles away. Black Duck Mountain had gathered all the itinerant cultivators within 10,000 miles, and under the leadership of Daoist Fat Duck, they were fighting against the army led by Wu Qi. Meanwhile, at Blue Phoenix Rock, Hua Qingfeng, a famous itinerant cultivator in Zhong province, had gathered a large number of itinerant cultivators to fight against Bo Yunting. The battle there was even more tragic than in Black Duck Mountain, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Some soldiers, led by their generals, were enjoying the beautiful bodies of the captured maidservants, while others, who did not care much about women, were searching the entire mountain and looting all the treasures collected by Daoist Fat Duck. A large number of gold, silver, pearls, corals, gemstones, hawksbill turtles, and other valuables were brought out, piling up into a small hill in the square. A flying ship came flying over the sky, and dozens of oracles from the Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County of Hai Province drifted down from it. They bowed respectfully to Wu Qi, then pulled out immortal detaining needles, god-suppressing talismans, and other restrictive magical artifacts to capture the 200 lower-grade itinerant cultivators who were kneeling on the ground in the middle of the square. The flying ship landed slowly, and the 200 cultivators boarded it. After that, it sped back to East Sea County. Wu Qi looked up at the white clouds in the sky and did a quick calculation with his fingers. Currently, there were more than 6,000 itinerant cultivators in the dungeon of East Sea City. But, the quality of these itinerant cultivators was far inferior to the cultivation base of Reverend Yao Yu and his clan. It would take a long time for him to fulfill Lei Meng's request, complete 360 sacrificial ceremonies, and gather enough sacrifices. But, as Yu had attacked Myriad Immortal Alliance, and many itinerant cultivators were caught in the crossfire, it was not difficult to capture some of them alive. As long as the war lasted for more than 10 years, Wu Qi was confident that he could gather so many itinerant cultivators as blood sacrifices. In the distance, the military supervisor of the prefecture overseer of Zhong province was counting the number of cultivators killed, calculating how many immortals with the cultivation base of heaven immortals and above were killed. Every corpse of an immortal or itinerant cultivator counted as a military contribution, and 50% of the loot had to be turned over to the central province treasury. This portion of the loot would also be counted as military contribution. Of the remaining 50%, Wu Qi, as the commander-in-chief of the army, could get 20%. 40% of the remaining 80% would go to Huang Liang and the other officers, and the remaining 40% would be divided equally among the 3,000 soldiers. The military chief was busy with his work. Wu Qi was sitting on top of a rock, overlooking the bloody Black Duck Mountain. Slowly, he fished out a jar of fine wine and took a few big gulps from it. He had no idea what Myriad Immortal Alliance was trying to do, but the sudden action of the alliance had not only caused a great loss to Diyu, but it had also brought a disaster to the itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent. When the human emperor's wrath spread out of Yuxiong Plain and drove the army under his direct command out of Yuxiong Plain, the future of the itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent was destined to be bloody. The core members of the Ascending Immortal Hall and Hidden Immortal Hall, the initiators of the rebellion, were still fighting Great Yu's army with their men. But 70% of the idle allies in the Wandering Immortal Hall had chosen to withdraw from the alliance, fleeing to outer heavenly realms and Pangu continent. They are courting death. Wu Qi shook his head and finished the wine in a few gulps. After smashing the jar, Wu Qi fished out a silver medallion from under his sleeve. The medallion was engraved with the image of a ferocious-looking Qilin, who was surrounded by 6 floating clouds. It was Wu Qi's current military rank medallion in Diyu's army. Great Yu's military system was extremely complicated, and it could even be said to be extremely complicated, especially the military system of the upper echelons, which used the titles of divine beasts and birds to determine the ranks of the generals. Wu Qi still could not figure out the whole system until now. However, the military system of the middle and lower echelons of Diyu was quite simple. The military ranks were divided into 3 grades: bronze, silver, and gold. Bronze was the rank of lieutenant, silver was the rank of major, and gold was the rank of general. There were 9 grades for lieutenant, 6 grades for colonel, and 3 grades for general. They were marked with descending mountain tiger, Qilin, and sun-devouring flying dragon respectively. General could serve in the military court of the 3 upper-grade provinces, colonel could serve in the 3 middle-grade provinces, and lieutenant could only serve in the 3 lower-grade provinces. In the past year, Wu Qi had led the army to conquer 27 colonies of itinerant cultivators, killed 679 heaven immortals, and captured more than 6,000 itinerant cultivators whose cultivation base was below heaven immortal. All these military merits had promoted Wu Qi to the highest grade of official colonel in Diyu's army. As long as he made enough military merits, he would be promoted to the rank of generals in Diyu's army. Among the 3,000 private guards who accompanied Wu Qi on the expedition, more than 100 of them were the lineal and collateral descendants of Yu clan. They had also gained a lot of military merits, and were promoted to the ranks of lieutenant and colonel. With military merits and official military ranks, they could leave their clan's territory and take up important positions in other provinces, or simply apply to be transferred to Yuxiong Plain and join the imperial army of Diyu to fight for a better future. Wu Qi had reaped great benefits in this expedition, and the sons of Yu clan who followed the army had also reaped the benefits they deserved. Wu Qi's relationship with Yu clan had deepened, and he had led the army and won every battle, which made him the most eye-catching character in Yu clan recently. He looked up into the sky and calculated the time. Then, he took out the topographic map of Zhong province, which he had obtained from Bo Zhongfu before he left, and browsed through it. Starting from Black Duck Mountain, he crossed a distance of about 3,500,000 miles, and came to another place where itinerant cultivators gathered, Black Qilin Cliff. According to the information sent back by the scouts of Scouting Office, nearly 100 heaven immortals and nearly 10,000 itinerant cultivators had gathered there. Almost all the itinerant cultivators in the nearby counties had been gathered here. Although the itinerant cultivators were scared out of their wits when the army of Diyu set out, some of them were wise enough to join forces to protect themselves. When these immortals and itinerant cultivators gathered together, they possessed an amazing combat strength. It was not an easy task to wipe out a gathering place. After pondering for a long time, Wuqi heard the moaning and panting in the pavilion gradually stop. Only then did he rise to his feet and snap, "Somebody, send all the captured servants and maidservants to Zhongning City in flying boats to be sold. The rest of you, assemble the army and march to Black Qilin Cliff. Military commander, make an inventory of all the armaments, bone talismans, and other items. If there are any shortages, quickly ask third young master to supply us." Following Wuqi's order, all the generals answered with a loud voice, and the army immediately began to move in an orderly manner. Just as the army of 3,000 boarded 3 large flying boats and was about to set out, a gust of wind came whistling over from afar, and a few oracles clad in grey robes revealed themselves amidst the gust of wind. One of the oracles snapped, "Third young master has ordered the army of Zhong province to rest and reorganize on the spot, and the leading generals will follow us to Blue Phoenix Rock for a meeting." Wuqi looked at these oracles in confusion. They were the emissaries sent by Bo Yunting, but why did they want the army to stop and reorganize? Wuqi took Bo Yunting's letter from the emissary, unfolded it and gave it a quick glance, then suddenly cursed it out loud. "The angel, Lu Bang, the king of Han, has come to Zhong province to mediate." King of Han. Lu Bang, fuck. Chapter 608. According to Wuqi's military rank, he was a first-grade military officer, and his rank was not even 100 among all the military officers. Therefore, he obediently stood in line according to his rank. Bo Yunting, who was sitting behind his desk in the tent, gave Wuqi a glance and gave him a slight nod, but did not greet him. The silhouette of Wuqi and Wuqi had perfectly fused into one. A bright glow rose from his body, amidst which, a clear voice rang out slowly, "The military minister of Hai Province's military court, Tan Lang of Zhong Province Military Academy." 2 beams of golden light shot out of the long bow man's eyes and swept across the silver medallion, producing a large sheet of silver light. Abruptly, the qilin on the medallion transformed into a ball of light the size of a human head and rushed out, roaring at the sky in a gruff voice. The 6 clouds around him transformed into 6 balls of colorful light and wheeled around the qilin for a while. Then, a thin beam of silver light shot out of the qilin's mouth, which formed the outline of Wuqi's face. Then, it pounced toward Wuqi. On the cloud platform, no one moved. Reverend Li Yang, who was following beside the chariot, frowned. Under each stone pillar stood 3 long bow men, each standing 100 feet tall. They were clad in heavy golden armors and holding huge battle axes with exaggerated shapes. Their bodies were densely covered with pale golden fiend runes. Their cultivation bases were strong enough to fight against Wuqi, which meant that their actual fighting prowess was strong enough to fight against a lower-tier gold immortal. The long bow man gave a simple and honest laugh, then cupped his fist at Wuqi and said, "This way, Your Excellency." The people of Long Bow Kingdom stepped aside and made way for him. Wuqi left his personal guards outside the tent, and the officers stationed on the cloud platform would come and greet them. Meanwhile, he himself strode into the gold-plated tent located right in the center of the tent. The various phenomena that appeared on the token were one of the methods used by the Deu military to verify the identity of the generals and prevent the immortals from spying on them with the art of illusion. The restrictive spell on the token was so profound that even with Wuqi's current cultivation base and knowledge, he could not figure out the origin of the restrictive spell. In short, unless it was a primordial immortal who disregarded his dignity and personally tried to deceive him, no one could deceive him. From the outside, the golden tent was divided into 2 parts, measuring only about 1,000 feet in both length and width. But, once inside, it suddenly lit up. It was a completely different world. Not only was it Bo Yunting's headquarters, but it was also where the supply camp and the craftsman camp of the army were located. Upon entering the tent, there were 2 entrances on the left and right, one leading to the supply camp and the other to the crafting camp. The entrance in the center was 10 miles away, and it was the passage that led to Bo Yunting's main tent. But, more than a year ago, in Hai Province, Bo Yunting had led a private army of 100,000 soldiers to reinforce Ningbo City, and in the end, Myriad Immortal Alliance killed all his soldiers with a star attack. The resentment nearly drove Bo Yunting mad, so when the human emperor issued the decree, he led the army and launched a storm-like attack on the itinerant cultivators in Zhong province. Blood flowed like rivers, and corpses were strewn all over the place. He had personally killed more than 1,700 immortals, which made him a truly fiendish figure. Blue Phoenix Rock, which used to be beautiful and filled with flying phoenixes, had become a wasteland. With the main peak of Blue Phoenix Rock as the center, 18 layers of defensive immortal formations within a radius of 1,000 miles were broken by Bo Yunting's army. Every time one of them was broken, it was a catastrophic disaster. All the mountains around Blue Phoenix Rock had collapsed, and the ground had sunk for hundreds of miles. Countless huge ditches had appeared on the ground, and black smoke and poisonous gas kept spewing out of the ground, making the main peak of Blue Phoenix Rock look like a living hell. With a light punch, he smashed the table, which was made of pure gold, into pieces. Bo Yunting snorted coldly and cried out, "I can't wait to kill this bastard." But, he is an immortal king, an angel conferred by the celestial court. So, when you see him, remember not to act rashly. Let's see what he has to say first. Bo Yunting was a burly man about 12 feet tall, with a face that looked like a shiji. His skin was blue, and his muscles were bulging. He was full of strength. As soon as he rose to his feet, he let out a deep snort, but a boundless aura emanated from him. Wu Qi could not help but praise him in his mind. Bo Yunting was Bo Zhongfu's third son, and it was said that he was a high-ranking general in the imperial army of the human emperor. He had come to Zhong province with his father, and was now in charge of the military court in Zhong province. He was a man with outstanding strength and means. Bo Yunting snorted coldly. Suddenly, he strode forward, drew out his sword, and swung it at Reverend Li Yang. Blue Phoenix Rock, which measured 100 miles in circumference and stood 100,000 feet high, was now the only place where green water and green mountains had been preserved. However, most of the hundreds of magnificent palaces, pavilions, eaves, and bridges on Blue Phoenix Rock had collapsed, and dozens of them seemed to have been destroyed by Great Yu soldiers. Although the fire had been put out, black smoke was still rising slowly into the sky. The golden tent was also an extraordinary spatial artifact. It had a space of about 100 miles in circumference, and was stocked with all kinds of resources, enough to support an army of 200,000 soldiers in a continuous war for more than 3 years. On top of that, its defense was so strong that it could not be breached unless more than 10 gold immortals were attacking it with their prime energy essence and powerful gold immortal items. While Wu Qi was sizing up this group of people, he heard a soft and graceful voice of a lady coming out from the chariot. "The angel has arrived. Why aren't you kneeling down and greeting him? What are you waiting for?" "Hee, my king, don't touch me, it's itchy." The only person who could attract Wu Qi's attention was Reverend Li Yang, who was standing on a white cloud and following closely behind the chariot. When Wu Qi walked into the tent, 500 to 600 military officers had already gathered in the tent, which was large enough to accommodate 1,000 men. These military officers were the military officers of the 300 provinces under Zhong province's rule. Like Wu Qi, they had each led a small team to attack the gathering places of itinerant cultivators. Now, they had all been ordered to come here. Wu Qi's face was a little blue, and Bo Yunting's face, which was already blue to begin with, had darkened at this moment. It was as if a thunderstorm was brewing in his face, and he suddenly grabbed the hilt of the sword hanging at his waist. A square-shaped cloud platform was floating in the air a few miles in front of the Blue Phoenix Rock, about 10,000 feet above the ground. On top of the cloud platform was a large, gold-plated tent. On both sides of the tent were neatly arranged military camps, which seemed to be able to house about 5,000 soldiers. 2 rows of 24 huge stone pillars were erected outside the golden tent. Each of these pillars was 30 feet thick and 300 feet tall. Huge braziers were placed on top of these stone pillars, and green pillars of flame shot up into the sky. The pale green light illuminated the entire Blue Phoenix Rock, giving it a glossy green hue, bringing with it a murderous chill that made one shudder. In the sky above the Green Phoenix Rock, a slim female immortal wearing a green dress and a green veil was standing on a white cloud. Around her were large patches of green light that looked like bird feathers that spun rapidly, creating ear-piercing sounds in the air. Dozens of disheveled immortals and itinerant cultivators were hovering around her. Some of them were stained with blood, some had their bodies pierced through, and some had their arms chopped off. Apart from the green-clothed female immortal, none of them were unscathed. Reverend Li Yang flew to the cloud platform, pointed a finger at Bo Yunting, and snapped, "How dare you be so arrogant when the celestial ambassador has arrived? Do you have no respect for the celestial court and the great celestial emperor? Lu Bang, the king of Han." Bo Yunting twitched his thin lips and said with a cold grin, "An immortal king conferred by the celestial court, a mere 32nd tier heaven immortal who has been conferred the title of immortal king by the great celestial emperor? I can't believe such a man has become the envoy of the celestial court stationed in Diyu, and has directly intervened in the war of Zhong province as soon as he arrived." Taking out the silver medallion that represented his military rank, Wu Qi held it up and cried out, "I am the military minister of Hai Province's military court, Tan Lang of Diyu's military academy." After waiting for another hour, hundreds of generals arrived one after another, filling up the large tent. These were all the generals under Bo Yunting's command. Only then did Bo Yunting rise to his feet, place his hands on the desk, and say in an unfriendly tone, "Someone is going to stir up trouble in Diyu's campaign against the many immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent." Wu Qi arrived at Blue Phoenix Rock with dozens of his personal guards. The dull beating of war drums could be faintly heard coming from all directions. Nearly 100 large flying ships were wheeling in the distant sky, on which sat large groups of armored soldiers on their decks, ready to launch another attack. There was a large group of feathermen hovering in the sky. About 50,000 feathermen soldiers had joined the siege on Blue Phoenix Rock. They were shuttling around the rock in groups, forming a tight defensive system to prevent immortals and itinerant cultivators from escaping. In addition to the 60 pairs of beautiful girls whose cultivation bases were no higher than the realm of Jin Dan, the chariot was surrounded by 3,000 heavenly soldiers clad in golden armors. Each of them was valiant and high-spirited, with their noses pointed skyward and an air of arrogance that could send anyone tumbling from 800 miles away. The strongest of these soldiers was a 30th tier heaven immortal, while the weakest was probably a nascent divinity cultivator. Outside the tent, a chariot was hovering in midair, pulled by 3 winged dragons. Behind it were 3 smaller chariots, each driven by a flood dragon. Next to these 4 chariots were 60 pairs of beautiful girls, holding various ceremonial weapons and looking down at the golden tent with smiles on their faces. Some of them were holding flower baskets, from which they kept pulling out flower petals and throwing them down. For a moment, the air was filled with a fragrant aroma, and it really looked like a paradise of immortals. Wu Qi and dozens of his personal guards transformed into a gust of wind and came to the jade platform. As soon as he showed himself, a longbow man took a step forward and stopped in front of him. The burly longbow man lowered his head to look at Wu Qi and cried out in a deep voice, "Who are you?" Over 1,000 military officers in the tent sprang into action. None of them had a cultivation base lower than 3 stars of the first Panga heaven, and each of them was like a dragon or a tiger. They turned and stamped their feet at the same time. A deafening rumble rang out, and the tent shook a few times. A murderous aura towered into the sky, almost materializing inside the tent. Bo Yunting gritted his teeth and strode out of the tent with over 1,000 captains, who were emanating a ferocious aura. While Bo Yunting was still telling his men not to do anything rash, a soft voice drifted in from outside the tent. "The celestial envoy has arrived. Who is the commander of the army? Come out and greet him at once." The face of Reverend Li Yang of Green City was still fresh in Wu Qi's memory. Even in his dreams, Wu Qi wished he could kill this evil immortal with a sword. But he did not expect that he would appear here, right next to the new celestial envoy. Damn it! Bo Yunting cursed under his breath, then cried out in a deep voice, "Generals, follow me out of the tent to greet the celestial envoy." Chapter 609. It was a clean slash, without any tricks, and not even a gust of wind was stirred up. The crowd only saw the sword slash down with a shrill whistle, and then Reverend Li Yang took a sudden step back. The void behind him disintegrated abruptly and sucked his body into it like a black hole. Although Reverend Li Yang had retreated quickly, the sword still slashed across his body, leaving a tiny bloody mark from the corner of his left eye to his chin. A stream of blood mist sprayed out from the back of Reverend Li Yang's head. The sword intent had pierced through his head, ripped open his brain, and caused a severe injury to his brain. Such an injury was nothing to a gold immortal, as he could heal it with just a little bit of immortal energy. But, the sword intent had shattered his brain, damaged his immortal soul, and destroyed some of his memories. In other words, his understanding of the heavenly Tao had been slightly damaged. Reverend Li Yang suddenly appeared 1,000 feet away, with purple gold blood oozing out of his 7 apertures. His aura had dropped significantly, and his cultivation base had dropped from the 7th tier of Gold Immortal Realm to the 8th tier of Heaven Immortal Realm. Although Bo Yunting had failed to kill Reverend Li Yang, it had caused him a great loss, causing him to lose a tier of his cultivation base. Ordinary celestial immortals would have to spend 100,000 years in order to break through to the next level. If an ordinary gold immortal wanted to break through a tier, he would have to rely entirely on his own understanding of the heavenly Tao, and it would take him several eons without any success. Reverend Li Yang was backed by Green City, and his ancestral master was his grandfather. Ever since he was a child, he had been fed with countless spirit pills and miraculous medicines, and had been forced into his brain by someone. When he became a gold immortal, the many elders of Green City had been teaching him everything that a gold immortal needed to know, and all the profound principles that they, the elders, had already mastered. As a result, Reverend Li Yang was able to break through to the 7th tier of Gold Immortal Realm with ease. The speed of his progress was only slightly slower than Lady Dark Goldwater, which made him a rare genius. However, it still took him nearly 100 periods of time to cultivate from 8th tier Heaven Immortal to 7th tier Gold Immortal, and countless spirit herbs in Green City, as well as the painstaking efforts of many elders in Green City. Bo Yunting's sword had not only destroyed Reverend Li Yang's cultivation base, but also indirectly destroyed the countless spirit pills, miraculous medicines, and countless efforts that Green City had spent. Reverend Li Yang raised his hand and stroked the tiny bloodstain on his cheek. Suddenly, he howled hysterically, "How dare you! How dare you! How dare you attack an angel's retainer! You audacious thing, you actually dared to injure me?" The retainer, Wu Qi, grinned coldly. It looked like Reverend Li Yang had climbed up a high branch. The registrar was the one who helped the angel organize all kinds of documents and organize the official correspondence. He could be considered a close confidant of the angel. Since the current angel was an immortal king conferred by the celestial court, Reverend Li Yang was at least a close confidant of the immortal king, and his official rank in the celestial court was comparable to that of an ordinary heaven lord. But, the official rank of the celestial court was not very useful on Pangu continent. Wu Qi looked at Reverend Li Yang gloatingly, wishing that Bo Yunting would give him a few more slashes, and it would be best if he could bring his cultivation base down to the realm of heaven immortal. If that happened, Wu Qi would not mind killing this guy right away. Bo Yunting did not even look at Reverend Li Yang, who was roaring at the top of his lungs. He coldly swung his sword, wiping away the faint bloodstain on its tip, then sheathed it and smeared at the chariot in midair. "Celestial Ambassador, keep your dogs in check. If they dare to bark again, Lao Tzu won't mind killing them all." "How dare you!" A loud shout was heard coming from the sky. Wu Qi raised his head and saw a burly man, standing over 10 feet tall, with a body as square as an anvil used for forging iron. He was clad in a suit of green gold armor, and held a pair of 9 feet long coiling tiger halberds in his hands as he leaped down from the sky. Wu Qi arched his brows. He could not believe that his divine sense did not detect this burly man just now. He gave the chariot pulled by the 3-winged dragons a suspicious glance. The chariot was shrouded in a faint cloud of smoke. Clearly, there was something mysterious about the chariot, which had blocked Wu Qi's divine sense from probing. The burly man had leaped out of the cloud. Wu Qi frowned as he scanned the burly man with his divine sense. The golden green armor worn by the burly man was very extraordinary. In Wu Qi's divine sense, he saw a total of 9 layers of immortal light wrapping around the burly man, each composed of an immeasurable amount of light. No matter how hard Wu Qi's divine sense tried, he could not penetrate the immortal light to find out the burly man's actual strength. With a swoosh, the burly man plunged down from the sky like a shooting star with a pair of heavy halberds in his hands. Good! Bo Yunting let out a long cry. A crescent-shaped shield appeared in his left hand, and his right hand drew his sword. He raised the sword backhandedly and met the man's halberds head-on. A deafening clang rang out as Bo Yunting staggered back dozens of steps. His legs gave way and he fell to the ground on his buttocks, stirring up a large cloud on the platform. The burly man let out a furious roar as his body bounced tens of miles up into the air like a rubber ball. Wu Qi had a good eyesight, and he could see a deep sword mark on both halberds of the burly man, which nearly broke the halberds into two. However, it was clear that the beefy cultivator's halberd was an immortal artifact of a very high quality. Although it was badly wounded, its vitality was not damaged at all. The halberd was slowly healing up. However, as the sword mark gradually healed up, the radiance on the surface of the halberd gradually turned dim. The 2 coiling tigers on the surface of the halberd, which were brimming with vigor, suddenly turned weak. It was as though they had been castrated. Bo Yunting sprang to his feet, his right arm trembling as he raised his sword. The sword, which was originally as dazzling as a pool of clear water, had become dim and lightless. There were 2 obvious nicks on the sword, and dense cracks like spider webs densely covered the body of the sword. It seemed that the sword had been completely destroyed. The weapons forged by the Deyu army were not as mysterious as the immortal artifacts forged by the immortals. They only pursued hardness, toughness, and weight, and few weapons would add any additional damage such as wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. Bo Yunting's sword was shattered, but as long as the fragments were collected and reforged, it would be a good weapon again. On the contrary, the 2 halberds of the burly man were left with deep sword marks. The damage was not light, and it would take a long time for them to recover. Bo Yunting dropped the sword and slapped the shield on his left arm. What a good man! You are much stronger than that mad dog, he exclaimed. You are a real man, much stronger than that mad dog. It makes me think highly of the celestial ambassador to have such a good man under his command. 4 chariots slowly descended from the sky, surrounded by many celestial soldiers, generals, and beautiful girls. The bead curtain in front of the first chariot slowly parted, revealing a dozen gorgeously dressed female immortals, all of whom were devastatingly beautiful. Their clothes were extremely thin, as if they were just wrapped in a thin veil, and they were escorted by an immortal king, who was dressed in imperial ornaments. He had a handsome face, but the expression on his face made people feel that there was something wrong with him. With a loud thud, the burly man, who had just been knocked flying away, landed on the cloud platform. He put away his halberds, strode to the immortal king, and carefully waited on him. The immortal king laughed and slapped the burly man on the shoulder, then threw his head back and said, Bo Yunting, the 3rd son of Bo Zhongfu, the prefecture overseer of Zhong province, you are also a famous young hero in Deyu, but Lao Tzu. No, I have a brave general like Fan Kuai, so I'm not afraid of you. Bo Yunting put away his shield and stared at Fan Kuai, then nodded and said, I'll remember you, Fan Kuai. Fan Kuai, a man with a rough face full of bulging muscles that made him look like a devil, laughed, then pointed a finger at Bo Yunting and said through clenched teeth, Boy, sooner or later, Lao Tzu will be beheaded. The immortal king, Liu Bang, snorted and interrupted Fan Kuai's fierce words. He narrowed his eyes at Bo Yunting and said with a smile, Fan Kuai likes dog meat the most. He said he would cut off the head of a black dog and invite General Bo to a soup pot. TSK, Deyu. Ha ha ha, Yu, Xia, Shang, Zhou. I can't believe the origin of Deyu is on Panga continent. Wonderful, wonderful beyond words. Puffing out his chest, Liu Bang beckoned behind him as if there was no one around him. My dear subjects, come and have a look at the army of the human race on Panga continent. How is it compared to our army? Hee hee, what a majestic army. wouldn't it be better if it were mine? I could lead them to wipe out the two old fools next door. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes. Lu Bang, the immortal king, Lu Bang, the king of Han. Does he mean it, or is it his nature? If it's intentional, isn't it too superficial? But, is it really his nature? This emperor is like a rogue. Two middle-aged men dressed like scholars and a valiant young man in a black armor walked out of the three chariots behind them. When they came to Lu Bang's side, their auras suddenly fused with Lu Bang's, so mighty that even Bo Yunting took a few steps back in shock. Wu Qi gave the three men a deep look. The two scholars ignored Wu Qi's gaze, but the young man in the black armor suddenly turned around and glared back at Wu Qi. The young man's gaze was as sharp as a blade, and it made Wu Qi's eyes sting. Frowning, Wu Qi exerted his eyesight, and a beam of cold light shot out of his chaotic divine eyes as he fearlessly struck back at the young man. The young man's eyes went wide as he exchanged a fierce glance with Wu Qi. A loud boom rang out in the void, and then Wu Qi and the young man squatted down with their arms over their eyes at the same time. Both of their eyes were red and swollen, and tears were streaming down their cheeks, making them look wretched. Lu Bang gave Wu Qi a surprised look. Shaking his head, he suddenly turned around and waved at Blue Phoenix Rock. Phoenix Fairy Hua Qingfeng, is it? I can see that you have a good figure, and you must be very beautiful. Well, I am the king of Han conferred by the Celestial Court, and my status is more than enough to match you. You are now my concubine, so let's consummate our marriage tonight. As soon as Lu Bang finished his words, everyone present was shocked. Bo Yunting, Wu Qi, and the others looked at each other speechlessly, while the people around Lu Bang were used to it, and their expressions did not change at all. Phoenix Fairy Hua Qingfeng, who was standing over Blue Phoenix Rock, was stunned. Why is an immortal king humiliating a lowly immortal like this? Lu Bang rolled his eyes, and his expression suddenly changed. Chapter 610. How can it be a humiliation? This is a favor, a favor. Lu Bang waved his hands and feet as he turned to Hua Qingfeng, who was a few miles away, and said, "You are a beauty, and I am an immortal king. An immortal king and a beauty are a good match. I have money, power, and a backer. I have millions of soldiers under me, and I guard the important western region of the heavenly court. I have 36 star venerates, 600 heavenly monarchs, and 3,000 immortal monarchs. Why are you hesitating when you have such a good man?" Clapping his hands, Lu Bang laughed and said to Hua Qingfeng, "Let's consummate our marriage tonight. Shao He, draft an imperial edict and send it to the great celestial emperor. Hua Qingfeng is my new title, and she is now Consort Phoenix." Behind Lu Bang, one of the two middle-aged scholars had 3 pupils in his eyes, purple, gold, and red, which made him look very strange. He nodded slowly and answered in a deep voice. Overjoyed, Lu Bang turned to Fan Kuai and said, "Go, bring that beauty to my chariot." Birds of a feather flock together, so those around a beauty are naturally beauties. Bring all her maids as well. Fan Fei responded with a resonant voice. He darted out like a flea, not allowing Phoenix Fairy Hua and Qingfeng to fight back. The pair of halberds darted out, bringing up a large amount of thunder flame, and smashed into the earth veins underneath Blue Phoenix Rock, completely cutting off the 2 earth veins. Instantly, the last defensive formation on Blue Phoenix Rock lost its energy supply, and the faint glow suddenly disintegrated, transforming into a rain of light that drifted in the air. There were 2 gold immortals guarding the rock as well. When they saw Fan Kuai rushing toward Hua Qingfeng, they roared furiously at the same time and shot out 2 beams of auspicious light toward Fan Kuai. One of the 2 beams of auspicious light was a phoenix bracelet inlaid with a golden dragon, and the other was a white jade sword with a tortoise shell. On top of both gold immortal items stood a vague humanoid figure. They were the item spirits who had cultivated into a human form and obtained mighty divine abilities. Grinning hideously, Fan Kuai snapped, "I'm Fan Kuai, the vanguard general serving King of Han, the golden dragon tiger general of the Celestial Court. How dare you offend me, itinerant immortals? Attacking Lao Tzu is disrespecting the celestial court. Do you want your whole clan to be executed? The two gold immortal items slowed down abruptly. While the two gold immortals hesitated, Fan Kuai had already rushed in front of Hua Qingfeng and punched her in the head, knocking her unconscious. There were 4 little maidservants around Hua Qingfeng. When they saw their master was knocked unconscious by Fan Kuai, the 4 girls, who were only in the gold core realm, roared furiously in unison and unleashed 4 beams of green light at Fan Kuai. Grinning coldly, Fan Kuai sprayed out a mouthful of purple gold airflow, and the 4 sword beams shattered into a cloud of smoke and dust as if they were made of flour. The 4 girls cried out in alarm and were about to flee when a dragon-shaped beam of golden light flew out from Fan Ku's waist, circled around the 4 girls, and tied them up like rice dumplings. Laughing loudly, Fan Ku brought them to the front of Lu Bang's chariot. After throwing the 5 beauties into Lu Bang's chariot as if they were bags of straw, Fan Kuai waved his hand behind him, and the 2 halberds that had cut off the underground energy veins flew back to him. Carrying the halberds, he strode to Lu Bang's side and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, Consort Phoenix is here." Lu Bang raised his head and said with a faint smile, "Good, you've done me a great service." With a reserved smile, Lu Bang looked at Bo Yunting, who had a strange expression on his face, and said, "Third young master, I'm here on behalf of the Celestial Court. Aren't you going to invite me in? Not to mention good wine and meat, you should at least have a cup of good tea, shouldn't you? You nobles of Diyu are very extravagant, so a cup of tea shouldn't hurt you, right?" Bo Yunting had never seen a man as mischievous as Lu Bang. After hearing Lu Bang's words, he clenched his teeth and said, "Somebody, prepare a banquet and entertain His Excellency the Celestial Ambassador with good wine and meat." Glaring fiercely at Lu Bang, Bo Yunting said with a sneer, "We only have the strongest liquor in the army, the soul-burning blood, mixed with flame grass. I wonder if His Excellency can get used to it." Lu Bang put his hands on the jade belt tied around his waist and strode into the tent indifferently. "Of course I can get used to it. There is no liquor in the entire universe that I can't drink. Soul-burning blood. That's a nice name, and I wonder how strong it is. TSK, third young master, you can't be stingy. There is wine, meat, and beautiful girls. How about 300 singers and dancers? You are the third young master of the Central Province Overseer." After exchanging a glance with Wu Qi, the black-armored young man slowly rose to his feet and pointed his right index finger at Wu Qi. The young man's eyes were a strange golden-red color. Apparently, when he exchanged a glance with Wu Qi just now, all the capillaries in his eyes had burst, and that was why his eyes were dyed this color. Wu Qi also rose to his feet and shook his head. His eyes were not damaged, for the power of the chaotic divine eyes was beyond Wu Qi's estimation. However, his eyelids were shaken, and the corner of his eye was cracked, with a faint trace of blood sliding down his cheek. He looked more seriously injured than the black-armored young man. Seeing the young man's provocative gesture, Wu Qi smiled grimly and cried out in a low voice, "I'm Tan Lang, the military minister of Hai Province. May I know your name, Your Excellency?" The young man blinked, then turned and followed Lu Bang into the tent. As he walked, he said in a gloomy voice, "I'm Han Xian. Remember my name, Tan Lang. Your head is mine." Xiao He, who had 3 pupils in his eyes, squinted at Wu Qi, then clasped his hands behind his back and walked toward the tent. The scholar walking beside him gave Wu Qi a curious look, then shook his head disapprovingly. Wu Qi heard them talking and laughing in a low voice. "Marquis of Huayin has not had an opponent for a long time. I'm afraid he's excited to see a prey this time, and has even taken a fancy to a young man like me." So, they took Wu Qi as their prey. Wu Qi grinned and gave the backs of Xiao He, Han Xian, and the others a glance. As Bo Yunting came out to greet the thousands of military officers outside the tent, Wu Qi followed the procession into the tent. Some interesting ideas were tumbling in Wu Qi's mind. He could not wait to find Xiang Yu as soon as possible. Even if it would cost him a lot of effort, he had to bring Xiang Yu to Panggu continent. Lu Bang, Xiao He, Han Xian, Fan Kuai, and the handsome and elegant middle-aged scholar who did not sign up should be Zhang Liang, the most famous of the three heroes of the early Han dynasty. When they fought with the mighty army of Xiang Yu, as well as the elite army of Great Chu, who had merged with Xiang Yu, it would be a wonderful battle. Not only Xiang Yu, but also Ing Zheng. He had to bring Ing Zheng to Pangu continent. It was Xiang Yu who destroyed Daqin, but it was Liu Bang and his companions who inherited the world of Daqin and founded the Han dynasty after the Qin dynasty. If the first emperor, Ing Zheng, and the ancestor of Han dynasty, Liu Bang, did not fight to the death when they met, Wu Qi would not be happy. Interesting, very interesting. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and almost burst out laughing. He had been operating on Pangu continent for a long time, and now he had a great advantage, which was enough for Yan Dan and others to sneak into Pangu continent. When the expedition was over, he would return to the East Sea city and start working on it immediately. He had to bring these old enemies to Pangu continent for a grand meeting. At the thought of this, Wu Qi could not help but murmur in a low voice, "The gears of fate have begun to turn." Hiss! All the hair on his body suddenly stood up, and he shuddered because of the vulgar words he had just said. However, this feeling of sitting behind the scenes and controlling some things, letting some enemies suddenly meet, was really good, really good. The space in the tent was suddenly enlarged by more than 10 times, and many logisticians quickly placed more than 1,000 tables in the great hall. The aroma of wine and meat wafted through the air, while delicious wine and delicacies were brought to him like flowing water. The aroma of wine was mixed with a scorching heat. Sure enough, it was the soul-burning blood, brewed with the liquid of tobacco. Wu Qi had heard of the famous name of this strong wine before. It was a wine that could burn a wild bull alive with just one gulp. Instead of calling it a good wine, it was more like a poisonous wine. For those whose cultivation base was not strong enough or whose fleshly body was not strong enough, drinking this wine was tantamount to suicide. Sitting in his seat and looking at the blood-red, sticky soul-burning blood in the bronze wine vessel, Wu Qi could not help but glance at Bo Yunting, who was sitting opposite Liu Bang at the end of the tent. The third son of Bo Zhongfu was not a pushover. It was obvious that he was trying to show his power to Liu Bang. All human generals were strong, and they could fight head-on against the powerful immortal techniques of immortals with their physical strength alone. Every human general with a high cultivation base was thousands of times stronger than an immortal of the same level. Relatively speaking, unless they were immortals who specialized in body cultivation, the fleshly bodies of ordinary immortals were much weaker than those of human generals. As for the soul-burning blood, if taken in large quantities by human generals, it could stimulate the circulation of their blood vessels and help them temper their fleshly bodies. However, if an immortal consumed it, he could only refine it, but if he did not practice the right cultivation method and could not dissolve the tobacco juice, it would be like a mortal consuming a large amount of arsenic. It was a clear show of power, a clear slap in the face. Wu Qi sniffed and cursed inwardly. There was something wrong with the wine in the vessel, and the concentration of tobacco juice was at least 10 times higher than the real soul-burning blood. Bo Yunting was not trying to show his power, he was simply trying to kill him. Glancing at Bo Yunting, who was sitting motionless, Wu Qi suddenly laughed. Interesting, it was getting even more interesting now. Suddenly, a bell rang, and 300 strong and vigorous feathermen girls, clad in fine leather armors and carrying short swords on their waists, marched into the tent. There were no singers and dancers in the army, so Bo Yunting's logistics officer simply called in the 300 feathermen girls to perform a sword dance. The girls cupped their fists and sang a song to the generals present, then drew their short swords and began to dance gracefully in the tent like gusts of wind. The swords merged into a large curtain of light as the girls danced gracefully, filling the tent with a cold gleam. Sitting next to Liu Bang, Fan Kuai's expression flickered slightly. He suddenly rose to his feet and stood behind Liu Bang, staring with wide eyes at the girls who were waving their swords. Bo Yunting grinned. He suddenly raised the specially made bronze vessel on the table, which could hold half a liter of liquor, and cried out, "Generals, let's toast to the King of Han." Ha ha ha, the King of Han is the celestial envoy of the celestial emperor, and it is an honor for us to choose Zhong province as his first stop to mediate the dispute. If we hadn't beaten those immortals so badly, His Excellency the celestial envoy would not have chosen Zhong province as his first stop. All the generals present burst into laughter. Bo Yunting raised the vessel, fixed his eyes on Lu Bang, and said with a cold grin, "Come, Your Excellency the celestial envoy, let's have a toast to welcome you." Under Lu Bang's unsightly gaze, Bo Yunting drank half a liter of soul-burning blood in one gulp. Chapter 611. Wu Qi finished the wine in his goblet and looked at Lu Bang with the thousands of military officers in the tent, waiting to see how he would deal with the embarrassing situation. The soul-burning blood was not something that Lu Bang, a mere 32nd tier heaven immortal with a weak immortal body, could bear. Once the wine entered the stomach, it would be a disaster. Once the immortal body was destroyed, even if the immortal soul still existed, how many years would it take for it to recover? Lu Bang squinted at the goblet in front of him, then slowly rolled up his right sleeve with his left hand, carefully picked up the goblet, and slowly poured the wine into the goblet on the ground. He smiled faintly and said, "The first goblet is to the heaven. The heaven has a spirit, and the heavenly Tao protects and breeds all living things. How can I not drink this goblet to the heaven?" Wu Qi was stunned, while Bo Yunting's face had shrunk into a ball. He stared blankly at Lu Bang, and it was obvious that he wanted to pounce on Lu Bang and smash him to death with a punch. After gritting his teeth and staring blankly for a while, Bo Yunting poured himself another goblet of wine, then raised his goblet again and said, "Your Excellency Celestial Emissary, you've come a long way. Ha ha ha, have another goblet, and then we can get down to business." Bo Yunting and all the military officers drank up the second goblet of wine, while Lu Bang picked up the goblet and poured the wine on the ground. He looked at Bo Yunting with a smile and said, "The second goblet is to Panga continent. Without the grace of Hutu, how could all living things survive and multiply? We can't disrespect such a grace." The corner of Bo Yunting's eyes twitched as he gritted his teeth and offered a third goblet to Lu Bang. However, Lu Bang still poured the third goblet of wine on the ground, then said to Bo Yunting with a smile, "The third goblet is to the ghosts and deities of heaven and earth, and to the souls of our ancestors. Without their protection and guidance, how could all living things survive in this world? The third cup of wine must be given to them." Wu Qi shook his head. Why was this Lu Bang like an oiled loach? He couldn't get a hold of him at all. It was really difficult to make him look bad. Laughing bitterly, Wu Qi picked up the wine jar and poured himself a full cup of wine, then gulped it down in 2 mouthfuls. Lu Bang poured 3 cups of wine on the ground, then smiled at Bo Yunting and said, "Let's finish all 3 cups of strong wine. Tonight, I'm going to consummate my marriage, and it's a delightful event, so I can't get drunk. Change it to some gentle and fragrant wine. This is wine that is only suitable for men to drink before going to the battlefield. It's not suitable for this king to drink too much." Bo Yunting's eyes turned green as he glared at Lu Bang. Then, he sneered and said, "It's indeed a good excuse to consummate our marriage." Lu Bang just smiled and looked up and down at the various furnishings in the tent, not listening to Bo Yunting's words at all. Bo Yunting gritted his teeth. In the face of a cunning and shameless man like Lu Bang, there was nothing he could do. Clapping his hands, Bo Yunting summoned his soldiers and brought Lu Bang a cup of rice wine, which tasted light and did not contain any tricks. Only then did Lu Bang laugh heartily. He took the initiative to pour himself a cup of wine, then repeatedly toasted Bo Yunting. Xiao He and Zhang Liang had also changed their wine cups to light wine. Both of them were well versed in the field of astronomy and geography, and they had come up with all kinds of toasts to liven up the mood. Their wine was so light that even ordinary warriors could drink 17 or 18 liters of it without getting drunk, let alone immortals. According to Wu Qi's estimation, the alcohol content of the soul-burning blood was at least 70%, and the strong smell of the wine and the strong medicinal strength in it. In just an hour, hundreds of military officers in the tent could not hold on any longer, and were carried out of the tent, their bodies flushed red. The pores of these military officers opened up, and a strong smell of alcohol and a strange heat kept spreading out of their bodies. Wu Qi also felt dizzy. Although his fleshly body had reached the peak of the first-tier heaven immortal realm, it was not convenient for him to absorb the wine with his chaotic energy in the tent. So, he could only rely on his fleshly body to hold on. By the time he had drunk 25 liters of soul-burning blood, his skin had turned fiery red, and all his pores had opened up, with tiny flames constantly bursting out of them. Wu Qi felt as if his muscles and bones had melted, and some wonderful changes were taking place. Feeling tipsy, Wu Qi struggled to force himself to sit behind the long table. As the celestial ambassador sent by the celestial emperor of the celestial court, Liu Bang had come to Zhong province to mediate the war. Wu Qi wanted to see what Liu Bang wanted to do. It would be a pity if he did not witness the show with his own eyes and passed out because of a little wine. Damn it, this soul-burning blood is really potent. Wu Qi cursed under his breath as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. Even his fleshly body, which was at the peak of the first-tier heaven immortal realm, could not withstand the attack of the wine. If it were an ordinary immortal, he would definitely die after drinking it. It was simply a poison. Fortunately, Liu Bang had poured out 3 glasses of wine in a shameless way. Otherwise, Liu Bang would have been dead by now. When there were only about 100 military officers left in the tent, including Wu Qi, Bo Yunting, who was overwhelmed by anger, finally calmed down. He put down the wine vessel, frowned at the empty tent, and said lightly, "I've had 3 rounds of wine, and I'm satisfied. It has been a year since you took office, and this is the first time you've used your power. What brings you to Zhong province?" Liu Bang had drunk about 100 liters of rice wine. He did not use his immortal energy to dispel the drunkenness. Instead, he enjoyed the feeling of being drunk, and deliberately made himself half-drunk. Leaning on Fan Kuai's thigh behind him, Liu Bang glanced at the maidens who were still dancing in the tent, then said with a laugh, "It's been a year since I took office. You can't blame me for that. The women on Pangu continent are excellent, wonderful, and beautiful. I've only hooked up with a few stunning beauties in Liangzhu, and they've given me a few concubines." Taking a deep breath, Liu Bang counted on his fingers and said with a smile, "The land in Liangzhu is very expensive, so I've bought a piece of land and built a Changel palace, measuring about 100 miles in both width and length. It took me more than a year to build it. But, how can I not build a palace? As an emissary, my term of office is 10,000 years, and I have to live in Liangzhu for that long. Without a palace under my name, what about my new concubines?" Wu Qi was stunned, and the other military officers in the tent exchanged glances, speechless. As an emissary, Liu Bang had not been busy with his official duties for more than a year after he took office. Instead, he was busy buying land, building a palace, and taking in concubines. Wu Qi smiled and breathed out a deep sigh. A supreme-grade talent. If Liu Bang had behaved like this in those years, it would be hard to imagine how Xiang Yu could have fought with him for so many years. But, did Liu Bang, who had founded the great Han dynasty, really behave like this? Wu Qi shook his head slightly when he saw the disapproving look on Bo Yunting's face. Since Bo Yunting had begun to look down on Liu Bang, he had been fooled. Liu Bang was a shameless and despicable person by nature, but if you really treated him as a scoundrel and used the same methods to deal with scoundrels to deal with him, you would definitely be the one to suffer. With a cold smile on his face, Bo Yunting, whose skin was also flushed, pressed his hands on the table and waved them off. The dancing feathermen girls in the tent left one after another. "So, you are busy running your family business in Liangzhu?" said Bo Yunting with a cold snort. "In that case, is the celestial ambassador's visit to Zhongzhou really to mediate this conflict as stated in the official document?" Shaking his head, Bo Yunting did not wait for Liu Bang to answer, but gave his opinion. "Myriad Immortal Alliance is so audacious that they have used the stars to destroy more than 200 cities in Diyu, killing and injuring hundreds of millions of people. The human emperor has ordered all provinces to send out armies to encircle the alliance. Emissary, you should be discussing this matter with His Majesty in Liangzhu." You really shouldn't have come to Zhong province. Lu Bang waved his hand lazily and said with a long sigh, Your Majesty is too difficult to deal with. In front of him, Lao Tzu. I can't even speak, let alone discuss with him. With a long sigh, Lu Bang took out a black pearl the size of a fist and said softly, So, I have no choice but to come here and discuss with you, the commanders of the various provinces who are leading the war. Well, in fact, Myriad Immortal Alliance was forced to do that. With a flick of his finger, a plume of smoke sprayed out of the pearl, in which there were flickering images of lights and shadows. Wu Qi recognized that it was the appearance of Ningbo City before it was destroyed. Wu Qi gave a cold snort and straightened his back, frowning as he looked at the images, trying to figure out what Lu Bang was going to say. The images in the images changed. First, it showed Reverend Yao Yu and his family being transported into Ningbo City from outside the city, then it showed 3 emissaries of Myriad Immortal Alliance entering the city. Then, the images changed again, turning into a scene that looked down from the sky. Wu Qi was leading dozens of military officers, chasing after dozens of fleeing heaven immortals. Then, the images stopped abruptly. Lu Bang put away the pearl and said with a lazy smile, This is the evidence provided by Myriad Immortal Alliance. All the evidence shows that there is a reason for the destruction of Ningbo City in Hai Province, which is under Zhong Province's rule. If Hai Province had not sent an army to wipe out Mount Moon Gazing and abduct Reverend Yao Yu and his family, Myriad Immortal Alliance would not have had a head-on conflict with Hai Province. Shaking his head, Lu Bang glanced at Wu Qi, who was sitting upright and staring at him. Myriad Immortal Alliance had sent emissaries to ask Hai Province to release Reverend Yao Yu and his family, but in the end, one of the 3 emissaries was killed on the spot. After that, Myriad Immortal Alliance sent dozens of fellow Taoists to persuade Hai Province to release them, but they were all killed by General Tan Lang, the Grand Oracle of Hai Province's Directorate of Celestials. Slapping the table, Lu Bang cried out, This is shocking. Third young master, this is shocking. Hai Province's behavior has forced Myriad Immortal Alliance to not be too harsh. If the mighty Myriad Immortal Alliance can't even protect its own allies, the Alliance Master might as well buy a piece of tofu and kill himself. Wu Qi opened his mouth and was about to scold Lu Bang. What Lu Bang had said. That was what had happened, but he had secretly changed a few words, so how did Hai Province become unreasonable? According to Lu Bang, it was perfectly justified for Myriad Immortal Alliance to destroy Ningbo City with a meteor strike. With a furious snort, Wu Qi smashed the table in front of him with a palm and sprung to his feet. Chapter 6:12. When Wu Qi jumped to his feet, Han Xian, who was sitting next to him and sipping on his wine vessel, suddenly glared at Wu Qi and yelled, How dare you? Sit down. Wu Qi turned his head and glared at Han Xian, then ignored him. Han Xian threw down his wine vessel, then his body suddenly exploded and transformed into a puff of dark mist, leaving behind dozens of afterimages and sealing off the void within a radius of 100 feet. Then, he threw a punch towards Wu Qi. Han Xian was also a body cultivator, and right after he threw out his punch, the void around Wu Qi exploded into pieces. Countless space fragments, which were the real Qi-Qi, lined up into a sharp triangle, piercing towards Wu Qi with a shrill tearing sound. Sneering, a large sheet of dark mist burst out from Wu Qi's body. Instead of fighting against Han Xian head-on, he suddenly shot out a large sheet of green flame from both of his hands. As Wu Qi flicked his fingertips, the flame transformed into 7 fist-sized, green runes. Accompanied by a deep incantation, the 7 runes converged inward to form a small arrow that was around a foot in length and as thick as a thumb. The arrow then pierced through the air toward Han Xian's fist with an unpleasant whistling sound. A strong light flashed in the tent. Wu Qi let out a muffled snort and took dozens of steps back. He was nearly thrown out of the tent by the punch. His armor was torn to shreds, and his battle robe was torn to shreds. His skin was densely covered with wounds that looked like the mouth of a child, many of which went straight to his bones, revealing Wu Qi's bones, which had turned pale purple. Blood was dripping down from his wounds, and soon, a large pool was formed on the ground. There were 17 fist marks on Wu Qi's chest and abdomen, and each of them had sunk 2 inches deep into his body. Just now, Han Xian had only thrown one punch, but in that instant, he had wounded Wu Qi's chest and abdomen 17 vital points with his fist intent. A soft, bone-piercing, and highly corrosive immortal power was circulating rapidly inside Wu Qi's body, destroying everything inside Wu Qi's body. Sneering, Wu Qi locked his hands into a strange incantation gesture. It was the extremely complicated, Heaven and Earth Indestructible Seal, from the last chapter of the True Body of Heaven and Earth scripture. As the incantation gesture took shape, a dense purple mist quickly gathered from all directions and surged into Wu Qi's body with a deep, muffled whistle. The countless wounds on his body healed rapidly, and so did the 17 fist marks on his chest. From his chest came the sound of bones rubbing against each other, which was the sound of the bones broken by Han Xian returning to their original positions and growing back. Coughing out a mouthful of extravasated blood, Wu Qi, suddenly, Wu Qi, and Qi, burst. On the other hand, Han Xian stood where he was with an extremely unsightly expression. He had thrown out his right fist just now, and now, his right fist had turned into a tumor the size of a human head. Countless sarcomas and blood bubbles were constantly bursting out from the huge tumor. These sarcomas and blood bubbles were all shaped like human faces, and some of these faces were even grinding their teeth and letting out shrill, unpleasant ghost howls. The sarcomas and blood bubbles were still spreading along Han Xian's arm to his body. In the blink of an eye, these ugly, redundant things had extended to Han Xian's elbow. Amidst the popping and popping sounds, the sarcomas and blood bubbles on Han Xian's right fist kept rotting and exploding, and dark red pus splashed all over the ground. With each explosion, Han Xian's face turned paler. When these exploded sarcomas and blood bubbles extended to his elbow, Han Xian's face had turned as pale as a ghost. These sarcomas and blood bubbles were formed by devouring and absorbing Han Xian's blood and energy essence, and with each explosion, his energy would be consumed a little bit more. At present, these sarcomas and blood bubbles were only growing on the surface of his skin, but soon, these filthy things had spread to his bones. His bones, which had been tempered thousands of times and were stronger than diamonds, were now creaking from the corrosion. It seemed that his bones could not withstand this vicious attack any longer and were about to disintegrate and rot as well. After laughing 3 times, a blood-red gleam flashed in Han Xian's eyes. He performed an incantation gesture with his left hand and pointed at his right arm. With a flash of blood-red immortal light, a stream of dark red blood sprayed out of his fist. The pungent blood fell to the ground, corroding a large pit about 10 feet in diameter on the floor paved with cloud brocade stones. There were no longer any new sarcomas or blood blisters on Han Xian's right arm, but the area below his right shoulder had become riddled with thumb-sized bloody holes, from which faint black smoke was constantly spewing out. Cultivating both fleshly body and magic. This is very rare on Panga continent. Han Xian looked at Wu Qi with an indifferent expression and nodded slowly. The 9 decaying arrow, said Wu Qi smilingly to Han Xian, I've just finished cultivating it not long ago, and you are the first to try it. It's very easy. Han Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Wu Qi, sizing up Wu Qi for a long time as if he had memorized every single hair on his body. Then, he said coldly, if we meet on the battlefield in the future, I'll chop off your head and use it as a decoration. After sizing up Han Xian for a while, Wu Qi said straightforwardly, there is nothing on you that I like. So, I'll just kill you and not collect any parts of you. Wu Qi sneered in his mind. Han Xian wants to meet me on the battlefield? How could there be such a good thing? Just you wait and see, I'll soon send your longtime enemy to you, and then I'll see what else you can be so arrogant about. Han Xian did not say a word. He nodded to Bo Yunting, then sat back in his seat, picked up the wine pot, and began to drink by himself. It was as if he was not the one who had just scolded Wu Qi and punched Wu Qi. Bo Yunting's face turned extremely unsightly. Han Xian had scolded his subordinate in front of him, the chief commander, and even punched Wu Qi. This was a complete disregard for Bo Yunting. Bo Yunting grabbed the wine pot and was about to throw it at Han Xian's head, so that he could teach Han Xian a lesson himself. But then, he saw Wu Qi grinning coldly, strode into the tent, cupped his fist, and bowed to Bo Yunting. Bo Yunting clenched his fingers and left 5 fingerprints on the wine pot, then slowly put it down and said indifferently, "What do you have to say, Tan Lang?" As he asked Wu Qi, Bo Yunting glanced at the large pit in the tent. The 9 corroding arrow was a very vicious curse among the secret curses of the human race, and it was very difficult for a talented oracle to master. Wu Qi's cultivation base of the true body of heaven and earth scripture had reached the peak of the 9 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, but in just over a year after he obtained the cultivation technique of the Directorate of Celestials, he had mastered the vicious curse, the 9 corroding arrow. He was a cultivator of both fleshly body and magic at the same time, and he had a very good aptitude in curses. Talents were hard to come by, and Bo Yunting had the intention to recruit Wu Qi. But, Wu Qi was now clearly a direct descendant of the Yu clan in Zhong province, and Bo Yunting still had to open up a lot of connections if he wanted to recruit Wu Qi. But, Bo Yunting was not in a hurry at all. As the 3rd son of Bo Zhongfu, few things in Zhong province could escape his notice, including the conflict between Wu Qi and Yu Miao. Bo Yunting knew it all. With Yu Miao, that old fool, causing trouble, Bo Yunting felt that Wu Qi was very likely to become a general under his command. With a warm smile on his face, Bo Yunting nodded and said, "Speak boldly. No matter what you say, whoever dares to touch a hair of yours will not be able to leave this tent today." A ferocious killing intent flashed across the corners of Bo Yunting's eyes, and all the military officers in the tent straightened their backs and looked at Lu Bang and the others with unfriendly eyes. That startled Lu Bang, and he cried out hurriedly, "Third young master, this is a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding." Bo Yunting pointed a finger at Lu Bang and snapped, "Shut up." Lu Bang's face fell, and he shut his mouth aggrievedly. He leaned against Fan Kuai's thigh and squinted at Wu Qi with a faint smile. Wu Qi gave Lu Bang a look, then told him the cause and effect of Hai Province's annihilation of Mount Moon Gazing. He even testified that Reverend Yao Yu had threatened the officials of Hai Province, killed all the officials of Hai Province, and even tortured and killed the former military minister of Hai Province. It took Wu Qi a quarter of an hour to explain that it was perfectly reasonable and in line with De Yu's law for Hai Province to send an army to annihilate Mount Moon Gazing. In the end, Wu Qi fired directly at Lu Bang, accusing Lu Bang of the so-called evidence provided by Myriad Immortal Alliance, which was completely forged with immortal magic and could not be used as evidence. Moreover, he accused Lu Bang, as an angel, of not being fair at all, and that he was unilaterally shielding those reckless immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance. In the end, Wu Qi snapped, "What an angel said is bullshit. If you use his forged evidence to force us to withdraw our troops, then we will be guilty to His Majesty the Human Emperor. First, we have let His Majesty down. Second, how can we face the hundreds of millions of people who died tragically in Hai Province? Hundreds of millions of people who died tragically in Hai Province." Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Bo Yunting almost spat out a mouthful of wine. Lu Bang jumped to his feet and roared angrily, "Bullshit. You are the one who is bullshitting. How many people do you have in Hai Province? How dare you talk nonsense in front of Lao Tzu? Ningbo City has only a little more than 1 million people. Where are you going to find hundreds of millions of people?" Lu Bang was a little angry. He did not expect Wu Qi to talk more nonsense than him. The seriousness of killing millions of people and hundreds of millions of people could not be compared at all. If millions of people were killed or injured, it could be brushed off with some offstage transactions. But if hundreds of millions of people were killed or injured, there would be no way to clean up the mess. Wu Qi gave Lu Bang a sideways glance with a sneer and said, "You have come to Panga continent for more than a year, and you have been busy building palaces and looking for concubines. How could you be so familiar with the civil affairs of Diyu? Don't tell me you don't even know how many people there are in Hai Province." Lu Bang was stunned. He blinked, then waved his hands and shouted, "Even if hundreds of millions of people are killed or injured in Hai Province, can the lives of ordinary people be compared to the lives of immortals? You have slaughtered hundreds of thousands of immortals and itinerant cultivators in Zhong province, and it's time for you to stop, isn't it? A life for a life, a heaven immortal is at least worth 1,000,000 people. You have killed so many people. That should be enough, right? He took out a golden scroll from under his sleeve and put it heavily in front of Bo Yunting. Then, he gave him a flattering smile and said, "Third young master, why don't we withdraw our troops and return to camp after signing this armistice agreement? Why do we have to fight to the death? TSK, I've given you 100 beauties, and all of them are virgins. Also, there are countless gold and silver, immortal stones, and energy stones. Let's not fight this war, okay?" Looking at the flattering smile on Lu Bang's face, Bo Yunting slowly pressed his palm against the golden scroll. A loud rumble echoed out as the golden scroll, which was strengthened with immortal energy, shattered into pieces. Bo Yunting snapped, "What the celestial ambassador said is ridiculous. A total of 987,654,321 people died tragically in Ningbo City of Hai Province. Wait until I've killed so many immortals and itinerant cultivators, then the celestial ambassador will come and mediate." Lu Bang stared blankly at Bo Yunting for a while, then suddenly sneered, pointed at Bo Yunting's nose, and shouted, "Good. You have guts, boy." With a flick of his sleeve, Lu Bang spun angrily and walked away, followed by Fan Kuai and the others. Wu Qi frowned. Was Lu Bang really here to mediate the war? Why did it look more like an act? Chapter 613. The flying ship was wheeling in the sky. Hundreds of miles away, a city towering on a lofty mountain was engulfed in a monstrous flame. The city of Dayu was built with boulders as the main material, but the flame on it was the prime flame unleashed by the immortals, which could burn through even the void, let alone ordinary boulders. The pale golden flame silently blanketed everything. The boulders melted amidst the flame, and the magma gradually shrank, eventually turning into wisps of smoke and dissipating in the air. The city was littered with corpses, and the city itself was burned to ashes. A huge pit, hundreds of miles in diameter and several miles deep, had been burned out of the lofty mountain. Some residual magma had piled up in the pit, with bubbles the size of a human head bubbling. A few groups of expressionless people, numb like the walking dead, were walking away from the city along the main roads. They staggered across the boundless wilderness, some of them throwing their heads back and crying from time to time, but there were no tears in their eyes. The fire had evaporated more than half of the liquid in these survivors' bodies, so they had no tears left. From time to time, some of them fell silently to the ground, and a pale golden flame suddenly ignited on their bodies, burning them to ashes. The others turned a blind eye to these people and walked past them. Even their blood relatives didn't have the slightest reaction. There was only one thought in everyone's mind: get away from this city, away from the hell where countless lives were killed. On the flying ship hovering high in the sky, Wu Qi was kneeling on one knee on the bow, gasping for breath. There was a piercing wound on his right chest, with faint thunderbolts flashing in it. It was caused by a peak first-tier heaven immortal who burned his immortal soul and sacrificed himself to a sword, becoming one with it and piercing through Wu Qi's defensive barrier and bone armor. If not for his quick reflexes, which allowed him to forcibly rip open the void with his fleshly body and flee about 10 feet away, the sword beam would have pierced through his heart. Even if it could not kill him, it would at least take away half of his life. As he tried his best to absorb the dense purple energy released from Panga continent to repair his body, the dozens of wounds on Wu Qi's body gradually healed, but the wound on his chest healed at a very slow rate. Wave after wave of severe pain struck Wu Qi, and he could not help but let out a muffled grunt. This battle was too bitter, too difficult. A total of 18 peak stage first-grade heaven immortals led 200 heaven immortals and 3,000 itinerant cultivators to attack Jianfeng City, the capital city of the Dark River Province, a fourth-grade province under the Central Province. All the military forces in Jianfeng City had been mobilized, and they followed Bo Yunting to wipe out all the itinerant cultivators in Zhong Province. Upon receiving the urgent military report that Jianfeng City was under attack, Wu Qi, who was leading an army to besiege a gathering place of itinerant cultivators tens of thousands of miles away, immediately led 3,000 soldiers under his command to Jianfeng City. 18 Peak Stage First Grade Heaven Immortals. Although Wu Qi was full of tricks, and he had killed 11 of them with sneak attacks, and the other 7 Heaven Immortals had joined forces, Wu Qi was still in a very difficult situation. He had almost abandoned the army and fled several times. As he could not use any divine abilities, he could only use the true body of heaven and earth scripture to fight the enemy with his strong fleshly body and the spells that he was not familiar with yet. Wu Qi was in a very passive position. If it were not for his profound attainment in the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the support of the body of the heavenly dragon cultivated by the dragon transformation script, Wu Qi would have been smashed into a meat pie by those heaven immortals whose overall strength was about the same as his. Even so, the desperate blow from the heaven immortal, which had burned his immortal soul, nearly killed Wu Qi. Fortunately, there were still 4 armies in the vicinity of Jianfeng City. A total of 20,000 soldiers rushed back to reinforce Wu Qi, who was nearly beaten to death. That was how he managed to escape with his life. However, after the great battle, the 3,000 private guards of Yu clan under Wu Qi's command were either killed or wounded, and only about 300 of them managed to escape with their lives. Most of them were crippled, and some of them even had their brains severely damaged. Even if they survived, they could only retire and retire. The 20,000 soldiers who rushed back in time also suffered heavy casualties. More than 27,000 of them were killed or wounded, and only less than 3,000 were still alive. The 4 generals who led the army had also been caught by the desperate enemies and exploded. The 4 generals and their subordinates were either wounded or killed. Now, among the 5 armies, Wu Qi was the only commander who could still move. Even though the 5 armies had risked their lives to fight these immortals and itinerant cultivators, a heaven immortal who cultivated a fire elemental cultivation technique still burned his immortal soul and spewed out a mouthful of prime flame, burning the entire Jianfeng City to the ground. Jianfeng City originally had a population of more than 2 million, but less than 200,000 people managed to escape from the city. Coupled with the natural disasters such as astral winds and thunder during the battle, more than 100 villages and towns near Jianfeng City were completely destroyed, and more than 1 million people were killed or wounded. Damn it! Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Wu Qi struggled to stand up and beckoned to Huang Liang, whose chest, abdomen, and thigh had been stabbed 3 times by the immortal sword. Call those brothers who still have the strength to walk and go down there to save them. There must be people alive in the collapsed houses in the villages. As long as they are alive, we must save them. Huang Liang had just unbuttoned his pants and reached his hand into his crotch to feel around. When he heard Wu Qi's order, he grabbed his crotch hard and jumped up to tie his pants. With a yellow face, he smiled bitterly and said, "May the ancestors bless me, the ancestors bless me." That sword grazed past my pouch and hurt the hamstring of my thigh. Luckily, it didn't hurt my treasure. May the ancestors bless me, may the ancestors bless me. Hearing Huang Liang's words, Wu Qi nearly vomited blood. He roared furiously, "Take our brothers and go save them, or Lao Tzu will castrate you." Huang Liang let out a strange cry and hurriedly jumped up. Limping and limping, he led the over 2,000 soldiers who could still move and rushed to the villages and towns near Jianfeng City. With the strong physical strength of human warriors, even if the houses had collapsed, with no more than 10 soldiers in a village, they could move all the collapsed houses away within 2 hours and rescue the people buried in them. Over 2,000 soldiers were more than enough to give emergency treatment to over 100 villages and towns. Sitting angrily on the prow of the ship, Wu Qi frowned and cursed Lu Bang and his brothers over and over again. Lu Bang, the angel, did not fulfill his duty as an angel at all. He ran around Yu with a large group of squires. It had been more than 3 months since the day Wu Qi first met Lu Bang. Over the past 90 days, Lu Bang and his men had traveled to 18 provinces in Yu, all of which were the capital cities of the provinces that had been destroyed. Almost exactly the same as when he was in Zhong province, Lu Bang forcibly took female immortals as concubines along the way. From 97 gathering places of itinerant cultivators in 18 provinces, he had forcibly taken 198 beautiful female immortals as concubines. However, his negotiations with the commander-in-chief of the provinces never yielded any results. Every time, he would show some so-called evidence provided by the myriad immortal alliance that the provinces had persecuted the immortals of the alliance, hoping to use it to persuade the provinces to withdraw their troops. But, the evidence never stood up to scrutiny. Just like Wu Qi, the commander-in-chief of the provinces whose cities had been destroyed retorted to Liu Bang with harsh words. After a series of curses, Liu Bang flew into a rage out of humiliation and left with his men, without making any attempt to mediate or explain. Just like that, Liu Bang had traveled to 18 provinces over the past 3 months. However, the places he passed by were still plagued by the disasters of war. There was no relief at all. On the contrary, with Liu Bang's mediation efforts, the itinerant immortals of the provinces seemed to have taken stimulants and began to launch a large-scale counterattack in groups. The siege of Jianfeng City involved over 200 heaven immortals, including 20 peak-level heaven immortals. It was the first time in more than a year that Wu Qi had seen thousands of itinerant cultivators. Moreover, these itinerant cultivators and heaven immortals did not care about their lives. Whenever they fought with the soldiers led by Wu Qi, they would explode themselves at the first sign of exhaustion. At least half of Wu Qi's soldiers were killed by the sudden self-detonation of their opponents. In the face of such crazy enemies, even Wu Qi could only sigh helplessly. When the top heaven immortal who fought him realized that his immortal arts and magical treasures could do nothing to Wu Qi, he burned his immortal soul and launched a desperate attack on Wu Qi. Although his immortal soul was burned to ashes and he died, Wu Qi almost died together with him. It was not only Zhong province, but also the other provinces. Immortals and itinerant cultivators of various provinces were fighting desperately against Yu's army with all kinds of desperate means. In just a few months, as far as Wu Qi knew, the army of Zhong province had lost more than 500,000 soldiers. Forced into a desperate situation, Bo Zhongfu even ordered the old soldiers who had been discharged from the army and returned to the countryside to be recruited back into the army. Even the soldiers who served under Feng Lingling were re-enlisted, reorganized, and returned to the army after being reorganized. Liu Bang, are you here to put out the fire, or to set it on fire? Wu Qi frowned as he looked up at the clouds in the sky. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the recent changes in the situation had something to do with Liu Bang. Don't tell me you deliberately instigated Myriad Immortal Alliance to fight us just to make it easier for you to find a concubine? Wu Qi felt that Liu Bang was capable of doing such a thing. The fiercer the battle became, the more difficult it would be for those itinerant cultivator clans who had been cultivating in seclusion to come out and fight with others. If that happened, wouldn't all the beautiful female immortals in those clans be exposed? While he was cursing what Liu Bang had done in his mind, Wu Qi suddenly heard a crisp sound of metal clashing. The sound was crisp and pleasant, but it came with a strange force that went straight into one's internal organs. Upon hearing it, Wu Qi felt his divine soul tremble, as if a force was about to pour into his head. Hastily, Wu Qi performed an incantation gesture, enveloping his entire body with a layer of gray mist, and only then did he stop the invasion of the force. Rising to his feet, Wu Qi looked into the distance. Hundreds of miles away, he saw a group of monks clad in kasayas and holding staffs in their hands, standing next to the crowds of people fleeing Jianfeng City. Each and every one of these monks was tall, dignified, and there was a faint glow of Buddha behind their heads. The suffering of the mortal world, the sorrow of all living beings, join my Buddhist sect, all will be liberated. These monks murmured some words to persuade people to join the Buddhist sect. Gradually, those people who had survived the calamity knelt down to these monks and threw themselves on the ground. Wu Qi's heart suddenly twitched. In just a short period of time to drink a cup of tea, hundreds of thousands of people had knelt down in the wilderness. From these people, a huge amount of faith power soared into the sky and constantly poured into the bodies of these monks. Chapter 6:14. Buddhist League cultivators had a high demand for the power of faith. Whether it was condensing relics or forming indestructible bodies, the power of faith was an extremely important resource. How could Buddhist League cultivators preach on Panggu continent with such great fanfare? But when the all-out war broke out, the attention of Deyu dynasty was attracted by myriad immortal alliance, those immortals, and itinerant cultivators. Naturally, no one paid attention to what the Buddhist League cultivators were doing. For a moment, hundreds of thousands of people fell to their knees, chanting the name of Buddha as the Buddhist League cultivators did. A great amount of pure power of faith poured out of their bodies and poured into the bodies of the Buddhist League cultivators. Gradually, the Buddhist light behind the heads of the Buddhist League cultivators became more condensed. After being transformed by their Dharma, the power of faith was transformed into extremely pure Buddhist energy. About 70% of the Buddhist energy remained in the bodies of the Buddhist League cultivators, while the other 30% transformed into golden beams invisible to the naked eye and rose into the sky, quickly disappearing. What a brilliant plan! Wu Qi sneered. It was indeed a brilliant plan. The officials of Deyu dynasty were a little dull, and their reactions were a little slow in the face of such a clever plan. Deyu dynasty was involved in the situation, while Wu Qi had always been an outsider. Therefore, he could see things more clearly than those officials. A faintly discernible aroma came along with the faint chanting of Sanskrit. A clear spring swayed around Iju, and a few lotus leaves grew out from the spring. 3 pink lotuses bloomed quietly, and a human silhouette shrouded in a faint pink light quietly appeared on the lotuses. The fat monk frowned at Wu Qi with a strange expression on his face. After a moment of silence, the fat monk chanted the name of Buddha and said in a deep and powerful voice, "I am Iju, the preaching disciple of Little Rui, delightful Buddha of carefree heavenly realm. This general has killed my junior brother today, which has sowed karma with Little Rui, delightful heavenly realm. If you are willing to bow your head and convert to Buddhism, that will be fine. Otherwise, you will be punished by heaven. Therefore, it was better to take advantage of this germination to strangle it when it had just appeared, lest these Buddhist cultivators develop the power of their believers to a point where they couldn't get rid of them in the future." Currently, the union of 10,000 immortals, as well as other immortals and itinerant cultivators, were engaged in a fierce battle with the Deyu dynasty. The flames of war were endless, and the people had no way of making a living. Yet, the Buddhist cultivators actually came out. Wu Qi felt that there was definitely something fishy going on here. Opening his chaotic divine eyes, Wu Qi sneered coldly as he looked at the power of faith rising in the air. When the myriad immortal alliance launched a desperate attack on the Deyu dynasty, the Deyu government immediately made the strongest counterattack. The battle between the two sides involved those immortals and itinerant cultivators who were living in seclusion. As a result, the dispute between the myriad immortal alliance and the Deyu dynasty immediately evolved into an all-out war between the immortal powers on Panggu continent and the Deyu dynasty. When the war caused countless people to lose their homes, the Buddhist cultivators took advantage of the situation and used their tongues to bewitch the people into becoming Buddhist believers. Buddhist cultivators. The blood soul immortal stunning bow was also one of the mystic arts of the Deyu dynasty's Directorate of Celestials. It used the user's own blood essence to conjure a vicious restrictive spell, which specialized in attacking cultivators' souls and souls. It had the powerful effect of defiling one's soul and corroding one's golden body, and was extremely lethal to both immortals and arhats. Wu Qi had spent more than a year fighting outside, and during his free time, he had studied many of the mystic arts of the Directorate of Celestials. Therefore, it was easy for him to conjure such a vicious curse, which was extremely powerful. Wu Qi shook his head. Karma. Convert. Otherwise, it would be the wrath of heaven. These words could only fool those mortals. How could Wu Qi be frightened by them? Laughing mockingly, Wu Qi cried out in a deep voice, "Wrath of heaven? Can you represent the heaven? How dare you?" Wu Qi grinned, then led the dozen flying ships under his command and sped toward the plain. A shrill howl rang out as the monk's Dharma body quickly turned green, shriveling and shriveling. His skin and flesh were rotting in many places, and a large amount of pus was oozing out of his body. In just a few breaths of time, the dignified monk had lost all his skin and flesh, turning into a pale green skeleton. A beam of light towered into the sky from the green smoke. The monk's Sarira tried to flee, but a few wisps of green smoke wrapped around it. A miserable howl rang out, and the Sarira abruptly turned green. As the wind blew, the fist-sized Sarira suddenly turned into dust and fell to the ground. Wu Qi's stand was very firm. He knew very well the bewitching power of religion over the people. He did not want the Buddhist League to establish a foundation in Zhong province, and he did not want them to take the opportunity to enter Hai province and his territory. When all the people in his territory became believers of the Buddhist League, who would listen to whom? What if all the soldiers in his army in Hai province were believers of the Buddhist League? Would the army listen to him or the cultivators of the Buddhist League? Was there an eminent Buddhist League overseeing this place? Wu Qi immediately put his guard up. The monks walked among the people who knelt on the ground, chanting the name of Buddha while a faint golden Buddhist light sprinkled from their bodies. Wherever the Buddhist light passed, the wounds on the people's bodies healed quickly, and their exhausted physical strength was quickly replenished. The sadness, grief, confusion, and numbness in their hearts gradually calmed down. There was only warmth and peace in their hearts, as if they had come to the paradise of bliss, where they would never have to go through the cycle of reincarnation again. Wu Qi frowned deeply as he looked at these monks, who were clad in kasayas and holding staffs in their hands, looking solemn and dignified. He had dealt with a group of monks, including Arhat Bao Sheng. These monks were people who would not get up without benefits, and their Taoist rites were located in outer heavenly realms. Like those immortals, the cultivators of the Buddhist League had been forcefully suppressed by the Yu dynasty on Panggu continent. Wu Qi's face furrowed abruptly. Was this the so-called eminent Buddhist League? Monk Yi Zhu was so angry that his white flesh was trembling. He pointed a finger at Wu Qi and roared furiously, then suddenly raised a hand toward the sky. A beam of golden light towered into the sky and exploded into a golden rain of light about 100 miles in diameter, forming a huge swastika. Laughing hideously, Monk Yi Zhu said, "What a ferocious vile creature. It just so happens that an eminent senior of our sect is overseeing this place. Let him purge your foolish fools. Why are you in such a hurry to summon me, Yi Zhu?" A very pretentious voice rang out. Wu Qi took a heavy step forward and unleashed an oppressive aura, causing Yi Zhu and the cultivators of the Buddhist League behind him to drift back hundreds of feet. "Cut the nonsense!" Wu Qi snapped. "Tell your fellow bald donkeys to get the hell out of Zhong province, or else you'll suffer the same fate as that bald donkey just now." With that ugly face and head full of scars, who else could it be but Lao Ai's precious disciple, Madman Shui? Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath as he vaguely sensed something. Wu Qi felt a vast, mysterious, and frightening force covering the entire sky above Panggu continent. He glanced around with his chaotic divine eyes, and a faint auspicious light spread out in all directions. In a flash, he could see all the changes in the aura within a radius of 10 billion miles. Not only around Jianfeng City, but in other places very far away, there were similar golden auspicious lights towering into the sky. Judging by the number of auspicious lights, there were at least hundreds of thousands of cultivators of the Buddhist League recruiting believers on the battlefield between human and immortal. Wu Qi gave a cold snort and cried out in a deep voice, "Huang Liang, activate all flying ships' defensive mechanisms and prepare for battle." Instead of saying that Liu Bang was trying to extinguish the flames of war, it was better to say that he was fooling people. By assuming a posture of wholeheartedly mediating disputes, he could even anesthetize many people in the Yu dynasty, drawing all their attention to him and the celestial court he represented. Wu Qi looked coldly at the huge group of cultivators and said, "Leave the territory of Zhong province. I don't care what strange plans you Buddhist League have in other places, but not in Zhong province. You want to develop believers in Zhong province? Dream on. Damn you." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi suddenly stretched out his hands and made a posture of drawing a bow and shooting an arrow. The misty green gas condensed into a bow and a long arrow in his palm. He chanted a few spells in a low voice, and a trace of blood oozed out from the corner of his eyes. The blood flowed into the arrow like a living thing, and a strange magic talisman that looked like a big eye was drawn on the arrowhead. When the cultivators of the Buddhist League saw their fellow disciple killed by an arrow, they all chanted the name of Buddha and flew into the sky angrily. Both sides bumped into each other in midair. A fat monk, standing over 10 feet tall, with a fair and plump face, pointed his finger at Wu Qi and snapped furiously, "How dare you? Why did you hurt my junior brother with such a vicious curse?" Especially when Wu Qi was planning to bring Yan Dan and others to Panga continent, there were too many unspeakable things in his territory in the future. If the Buddhist League established a foundation in Zhong province, it would be like he suddenly had countless spying eyes around him, and it would be difficult for him to keep any secrets. With a long cry, he thrust his right hand forward, and the arrow shot out silently with a trail of green smoke that was over 300 feet long. Hundreds of miles away, a smiling monk was touching the head of a severely injured elderly man, injecting his power into his body and healing him. Suddenly, an arrow pierced into his chest. Along with a series of hissing noises, the monk's face paled immediately. The green arrow exploded in his chest and transformed into thin streams of green smoke, coiling around his body and wrapping him up. Huang Liang and a few generals stood behind Wu Qi, guarding him with bone talismans in their hands. They were ready to strike at any time. They also looked at the monks in confusion. They could not understand why Wu Qi suddenly attacked them. At least, in Huang Liang's opinion, these monks were helping to appease the common people, so he should save as many people as he could. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.